I am live. I'm on the clock in, I believe it's 20 slow drafts at last check. I've lost count at this point. Undoubtedly on the clock in more since I last checked. We're going to make a lot of picks today. We're going to talk about the early rounds. I'm into about the round 4, 5, 6, 7 range in all of these drafts. Start talking about how I'm building out stacks and correlations as we reach sort of the end of that wide receiver window. What I'm doing in this batch of builds. This is Stealing Signals. Let's go. Welcome in, guys. What is up, gyms all around? Let's start making some picks immediately. My favorite shows are the ones where we just jump right into it. A bunch of them on the clock to get through. These are deep size. A couple 1 hour remaining ones. I haven't done any this morning. It's 8 o'clock my time. So I get, all of them done before I hit the sack the previous night. And then it's a matter of when I wake up, do I have any that are going to, time out before I go live or anything like that? Wasn't the case today. This is an eliminator that I just jumped into. Looks like I started Puka, Olave, Diggs. The Stefon Diggs thing I tweeted about, we're going to see a lot of Diggs in the third round in my builds today. I think this is a mistake that the market has made since my last builds or my last, run to the border and slow drafts, where Diggs' price has fallen to a range where, to me, he's fairly clearly in a higher tier than the guys that he's being drafted around. I'm messing with the layouts and stuff. I haven't really considered the layouts a ton since I started this. I got to get the right setups down. Although I also have my screen, my secondary screen vertical. You guys can probably see this better than I think you can. Yeah, you can see it plenty good. Yeah, so Diggs has fallen now to where, and it's funny because Cooper Kupp has risen at the same time. Kupp was that veteran that I felt like wasn't getting the respect for what he's done over the years, in closer to the 3-4 turn in a lot of drafts. He's now basically replaced Diggs in the early third, where Diggs falls now and frequently gets drafted behind Tank Dell. I've talked about that before. We could talk about it a little bit today as well. Welcome in, everybody. GM from Cabo. Thanks for hanging out, Kelly. Hope you're enjoying the sun down there. This says, what's the number next to your opponent's username? I don't even know. It's from the Draft Caddy from Brick. It's Pete Overzet has mentioned before that it is something to do with their drafting tendencies. I have not figured out how to leverage that. So I don't know what the numbers mean. It's the I assume the draft capital bucket. I really don't know. I assume my number means that I take a lot of receivers early, if it means something. Back to Diggs, though. Yeah, I've seen Tank Dell go before him. I think that's just an outright mistake based on Diggs' entire profile. You go back to his collegiate years, you go through his entire NFL career, that basically at every point of his career, he has earned way more volume than you would have anticipated, including last year where the efficiency was down a little bit. People are out on him because he's the older of this trio and the other two guys were there, and receivers changing teams is a concern. I understand all of that. The Texans don't agree with you. I want to be very thoughtful about what we're saying when we're out on Diggs, because the Texans traded a second-round pick and then immediately restructured him to a one-year deal. They knew that he couldn't really be a part of their long-term plans because they ended up extending Nico later in the offseason, and that was going to have to happen. And then obviously they're going to have to extend CJ Stroud pretty soon. So they can't be paying, Diggs 2-3 years from now what he's worth. And so they decided in this rookie QB window to bolster their receiving core with Stefon Diggs. It was worth a second-round pick for one season of this player. And people are like, that's not relevant to me. I'm not that interested. A second round picks, it's likely to be a later second round pick because Houston is likely to be a playoff team. They're good now. But there was some research a couple of years back that argued that the early second round picks, when the pay scale really drops off at the end of the first round, that they can be the most profitable picks, basically the highest surplus value in the entire draft, because there's still good players in the early second round and you pay them quite a bit less in guarantees and things like that. And so when they hit, the contracts are more favorable to teams and some of that stuff. And so, certainly like second round picks are not just given away. And people in the fantasy community are like, no, I'm IKBing it. Like, I know better that Stefon Diggs is bad now, even though the Texans are doing that. And even though CJ Stroud was so good last year that Nico Collins, we've talked about this, went from not having yet had a 2 yards per route run season to being over 3 yards per route run in his third season, which is something that didn't take Diggs 3 years to do, right? Like, Diggs was doing that immediately. He was really, really good. We talked about this when we went through the Houston stuff. I feel more confident. Now, Diggs is an age-related thing, but I feel more confident in Diggs as a long-term alpha than I do in Nico Collins, although I'm very high on Nico as well, and I'm drafting him in the second round. We're going to see him in a lot of builds as well. But Diggs is a big one for me to hit on early this morning, where you can start to get him outside the top 30 picks, and he's now paired with CJ Stroud. He's now in a situation where Nico Collins and Tank Dell are going to, in Buffalo, he was the dude. Those guys are going to draw plenty of a defensive attention. Diggs, for the first time in a while, is, probably not going to earn the same degree of volume as he did in Buffalo. I do agree with that, for the record, like that general concept. That's why I'm not drafting him, at the 1-2 turn, because with the efficiency that Stroud was able to add to all of his receivers, not just Nico going up to a 3.0 yards per route run, but Tank Dell being over 2 as a rookie, Noah Brown having a career high by a half a yard per route. That's like meaningful stuff, right? Every guy on this team except Robert Woods was putting up huge efficiency. Dalton Schultz was like right in line with his best career season and had like a higher drop rate, and frankly just didn't play well last year, and yet still came out very solid. Because, as far as I'm concerned, it's because of the offense. I think Bobby Slowick did a great job, and it's because of CJ Stroud. This is a situation we want to be in on, and that's why the market's in on all these receivers. But the guy who has the best case to just be the pure alpha is now the one that people want to draft the latest. It's really wild to me that the Texans gave up a second round pick to restructure this guy for a 1-year deal to be a key part of what they want to do, to be this is a guy that just wins on routes. Like, the last 4 years, he's been at least 24.6% targets per route run all 4 years in Buffalo. The yards per target element of that has bounced around, which has meant his yards per route run has bounced around. But even last year, when the yards per route run was weaker, it was 1.99. It was he's a 2 yards per route run player. I said a minute ago, it didn't take Diggs until his third year to do what Nico did. That's like, to clarify that, I'm looking at his career numbers now. He was a 1.81 yards per route run guy as a rookie. Nico was 1.24 and then jumped to 1.68. Diggs' first 3 years were 1.81, 1.91, 1.90. Like, immediately was a really high level player, frankly. That's really solid, the 1.9 range when you're approaching 2. He was 1.72 in 2018. That's when they had him in a really low ADOT role. They kind of pigeonholed him into this like short line of scrimmage role in 2018. It was kind of weird. He had a ton of volume that year. He was actually really productive. A lot of catches in PPR leagues, very productive. Not good from a yards per target standpoint because of the low ADOT role. And then the next year, they made him into like a hyper high ADOT role. It's crazy. Then he went down to 9.8 ADOT in 2018. The next year, 15.6 ADOT. And I remember writing about this after 2019 going into 2020 when he went to the Bills. The Bills traded all this draft capital for him, similar to what I'm talking about with Texans trading for him, to make him an alpha, to throw him the ball at all depths. Because I was writing about this because typically wide receivers own their ADOT. They tend to be the types of players they are. They don't fluctuate massively. And the fact that Diggs went from a 9.8 ADOT on big volume, almost 600 routes in 2018, to 15.6. The average is about 11. So multiple yards below the average, or a yard and a half below the average, and then like 4.5 yards above the average. one year to the next in Minnesota was like, to me, it was a clear indication that Minnesota was kind of pigeonholing him into roles in their offense the 2 different years. And then they trade him, and Buffalo, I mean, everything has stabilized since. So he was at 10.5 in his first year in Buffalo, right near the average, league-wide average, 11.9, 11.9, 10.8, right in that like alpha average range where he's seeing short targets, he's seeing vertical targets, he's seeing, and all of those ADOTs, strong targets per route, right? So the weighted targets per route has been hyper consistent, very, very good, right near what Nico was able to do this past year in his breakout year. Now, in Nico's second year, he earned volume really effectively too. His yards per target were the thing that lagged on his yards per route run. He did still get a strong targets per route run for a guy with an above average ADOT. He had a weighted targets per route run that was, not up to Diggs' best seasons, but it was good. And like, I'm not knocking Nico's 3-year progression. He's gotten consistently better each year, and to me looks like a legit player. Again, I'm drafting him in the second round. I think he's a stud. I also think Stefon Diggs is still really good, and I think Stroud clearly elevated Nico, and I think Stroud clearly elevated Noah Brown, and I think, you look at Tank Dell, and it wouldn't be that surprising in the context of the 2 things I just said to find out that Tank Dell's, everyone keeps saying, well, Tank Dell was even better than Nico when they played together. Like, okay, but like, can we keep in mind that was 320 routes for Tank Dell? Like, how much are we going to put on 320 routes? And it was good, but it wasn't like otherworldly. And what Nico went on to do when he was the only guy and had more defensive attention and everything was so much better than what either of them had done together that his yards per out run ended up almost, for the season, ended up almost a full yard better than Tank's. Tank's was 2.22 as a rookie. That's really good. I'm not knocking Tank. Anytime a rookie's 2+ yards per out run in a good offense, you want to be in on him too. But to me, like, Tank Dell ran 320 routes, got hurt, and then the team went out and got Stefon Diggs. And like, I just think you're looking at Diggs and Collins as the 2 guys whose profiles are so much more bankable. And on Tank, you're projecting a 320 route sample forward and hoping he's a strong efficiency guy. And you're hoping, I think like in Dynasty, he's fun. But man, I mean, like all of this stuff is like, I'm not trying to knock Tank. All of this stuff is, is very pro Houston. What I don't get is how Stefon Diggs is the one free falling and not, DJ Moore or a lot of these other dudes that, I mean, I know Moore's sliding too, but Nico's rising at the same time. So, and then Tank is rising. And so it's like, there's this increasing certainty right now that Stefon Diggs is the Texan you don't want. And that's the thing that I'm going to exploit. Like, or I'm trying to. We'll find out if I'm way off on that. But that is the thing that you're going to see a lot of Stefon Diggs in my builds today. That I just was clicking him constantly in the 3rd round. I didn't intend to have a massive position on Diggs, but I'm going to wind up with one because I just entered 100 drafts at a time where his ADP, to me, put him in a range where he was, like I said, a tier above some of the guys that he's with. So, GM guys, welcome in. We got, oh, there you go. How many BBMs they did last year is the number. That makes sense. I think I did 40. I got a late start. And you got some people who did 150. That fits. Got a few people noting that. That's helpful. Draft patterns from last year's BBM drafts. What people saying they still haven't figured out what the number in front of that means, the 7.5. I'm not sure about that either. How likely they are to stay in their lane and not snipe. Anyway, you guys would have to tell me. I like this one too. Big fan of the username Cutler for life. I'm a big fan of all the fun usernames. Tiger Upcut says, I like Nico because I feel he has upside to be a top 5 pick next year. Probably not the case with Diggs. That's fair. I love to do the next year upside cases. I don't apply that to vets in the same way. I like to apply that to breakouts and consider that concept when it comes to breakouts. But when you're thinking about vets, like, the reality is they typically have to produce in a big way just to maintain their value. If Travis Kelce has another big season, he's not going back to the first round. He's going to stay in the fourth round. People have decided at this point that there's a long-term cliff concern. I was kind of curious why that hadn't happened last year with Kelce, and he was still going in the first. So there's really like, I think that would be an argument to literally never take a late 20s or 30s receiver, which I used to play that way. Like, you could play that way if you want to. But I do think, something I tweeted a little bit ago, Jacob Sanderson had sent out a tweet or a quote tweet to a Brandon Ayuk comment, and I replied to him on Twitter a minute ago. The Ayuk comment was that if you are in on Ayuk, you don't want him traded. He's in the best place he could be in San Francisco. And my comment was, or his comment was, there's probably a lot of places that are better than San Francisco. He only had 105 targets last year, which is the number I keep repeating on all these streams, as you know. And I replied to it and was basically like, it's crazy to me that we're so into the advanced metrics now we don't even talk about volume. Like, this is a cumulative game. We talk about cumulative numbers. That's how you win in this. I mean, I understand the idea of weekly ceiling and the way that people are trying to plan for the playoff weeks. It has, like, it's gotten, I think, over the top in terms of, we're not valuing Stefon Diggs' consistent ability to earn high-level volume over the course of full seasons, over the course of big route samples, because he's a little older, and we're like sure that he's going to fall off, even though the Texans aren't sure of that because they went and paid for him this offseason. Or like Davante Adams, we're definitely certain is bad now. That's not a fair way to reflect the market's perception of Adams. That was kind of unfair. But I see a lot of people kind of coming at Adams, and I'm like, I'm still drafting him a little. His yards per target side of the yards per out run equation was weak last year, but again, earned big volume. And it's just really good at earning targets. And the ability to amass big volume is a necessary element to putting up big fantasy seasons. That's what, like, we're at this turning point right now where we have some of these veteran receivers who can earn volume in a major way and have shown that ability over multiple years, and then they have a down efficiency year and people think they're bad now. This is exactly why I was on Keenan Allen and Mike Evans last year. I was bigger on Godwin than Evans, but I was still drafting Evans as well, and I had a lot of teams. Most of my good teams in the PBM last year were Keenan Evans teams. And last year was the year where I was like, man, I didn't used to draft this much of older receivers because I got concerned about that kind of stuff. But if you're just going to discount the proven target earning and then the range of outcomes that comes with it, this on the efficiency side, again, like, break yards per out run into the two elements, targets per out run and yards per target. Understand that wide receiver isn't opportunity and efficiency. It's a 3-part element. Routes is the opportunity. Target earning is a skill, and it's a stable skill. And this is like the most important element for me. And then efficiency after the target is earned. Yards per target, touchdown rate, yak ability, catch rate, drop rate, if you want to factor that in. All that's after the target efficiency. That's going to vary more year to year. It's still important. Some people will fully regress that out. You shouldn't. Brandon Ayuk's elite at that. It matters that he's elite at that. He's a good football player. And he's also very good at earning targets. But there's then an issue of routes in his offense. There's an issue of how high his targets per route can actually get when he's earning targets against other elite target earners. There's going to be there's also elements of his offense where, like, there's going to be play designs for George Kittle, for CMC, for Debo, that are, first look play designs that aren't, he's technically running a route. Some classifications will not have him run a route, but he's running a route, but he can't even really earn a target on that route because the ball's just going another direction. And so, thinking through all of that type of stuff is so important when we think about range of outcomes, probabilistic thinking, not being sure of what is going to actually happen in the NFL season. It's chaotic, right? People are hyper confident in their predictions right now. People have stances and they want to defend them. They're beg defending all of this kind of stuff. When I start talking about the Diggs thing, I sound hyper confident. It's more that, like, I'm not willing to dismiss the old guy. I didn't want to be heavy on Diggs, but like the way that he's earned volume, I feel pretty confident he's going to factor in the way that Houston paid for him with a second round pick. And then, they restructured him in a way that was like, yeah, we know that you might have to walk in free agency next year, but we're taking this shot. Second round pick for 1 year of Stefon Diggs. Tells me that they want him to be a big part of their offense this year as CJ Stroud continues to develop. Year 2 of CJ Stroud. They want that thing that a veteran receiver can bring, that the Bears were looking for in Keenan Allen that no one seems to value. Yeah, Keenan Allen's, I can take him in the 5th round every time. This guy earns volume like in his sleep. He's the best route runner. I saw a clip earlier today that was Keenan Allen mic'd up. You guys probably saw it. It's coming from the Hard Knocks footage and all that. And the voiceover is like talking. It's one of the probably offensive coaches, maybe the offensive coordinator. I'm not sure exactly who, but they're talking about how every other player on the team is using Keenan Allen's route footage as teaching tape, right? Like, and it's not just the players on the Bears; it's the players around the NFL. You hear all these players say, who are your favorite receivers that you watch, and every time it's Davante Adams and Keenan Allen come up every time. These guys are such incredible route runners and so good at creating separation that every other receiver around the league who's trying to get better, they're already NFL receivers. They're the best of the best. They're being interviewed. And the questions are, you're already so successful, but how do you try to get better? And the answers are, I want to go figure out what Keenan Allen and Davante Adams are doing. But yeah, we're just going to pretend like that doesn't matter. The ability to consistently get open every single snap doesn't matter because a guy can get efficient, can be efficient. I mean, target volume is how you rack up points. And just because an older player is not efficient in one season doesn't mean that like he's definitely done. There is that age cliff concern. There is the element of like once guys are starting to lose it, once they're older, you're going to start to see a decline in efficiency and stuff like that. When I start to see that at running back, I'm definitely out. And I can understand why people want to be out at receiver, but I think it's gone too far in a couple cases. And I think Diggs is a really great example, especially because they changed the offense mid-season last year, and it kind of tweaked some things. It changed his ADOT a little bit. There's some concerns with Diggs' 2023 sample, but he's not over the hill. Like, this is not a dude that was bad last year. He's he's 30. He'll turn 31 in November. But he earned 160 targets last year. I don't know. I don't get it. I don't get the hating on pure volume, hating on older receivers. The thing about the older receivers and the pure volume element is like they're more established. They earn cheap targets better. I mean, the good ones. Like they're able to just rack up more target volume because they're the nuances, right? The timing, all of this stuff. It's like how Michael Jordan developed, the turnaround jumper and just would it was automatic late in his career, right? Like he lost some of the other stuff in his game, but he developed something that was sort of unguardable late in his career. And I mean, that's like the wily veteran stuff. You're going to get some cheap work. You're going to get some easy work. So anyway, and then there's Travis Kelce, right? Behind ADP. Like he keeps sliding in the 4th right now. We're at this point where like people are, like I've been in a couple drafts where Kelce's been like the tight end 4. And I mean, I've done my projections and I'm probably a little bit too bullish on Kelce's age and all of that stuff, but I have him as a clear tight end 1 in projections. Now that's, again, my projections tend to run hot. They tend to be more upside focused, but like, Kelce was really good in the playoffs last year. He had a tough stretch in season late in the year, and so it shows some downturn in some of his efficiency metrics, but then you go and factor in how good he was in the playoffs, and it's like, okay, well, not certain this guy sucks now. And if Travis Kelce puts up a Travis Kelce season, he could just be the tight end 1. He could be the guy that in the 4th round is essentially the guy you need. Like is the tight end that proves the elite tight end point. I'm not saying he's going to be, but I'm definitely not passing up sliding in the 4th round Travis Kelce or sliding in the 3rd round Stefon Diggs. And look, I'm as much of I want to draft the young guys player in fantasy as anyone. I mean, objectively, I think people who are pushing up players who aren't going to earn enough volume, their teams are not going to win. I think it's a mistake. I think they aren't going to score enough points to advance. And so that's why I'm taking, shitty veterans. not shitty ones, good ones. But there's obviously concern about their ability to sustain and all of that stuff. Tank might flip Diggs. Seems like there's momentum there. This is like, I mean, it might happen. This whole thing in the ADP and best ball like ecosystem where it's like, oh, there's momentum. Oh my God, Tank's starting to rise. I got to start taking Tank higher and higher. And then it becomes like almost like a game. Like, oh, definitely got to take Tank over Diggs. Got to take positions. I'm going to start drafting Tank even higher as a result. I'm going to keep letting Diggs slide because Diggs is sliding. It becomes a self-referential thing, right? It's like self-reinforcing. Like, oh yeah, Diggs is sliding, so there must be a reason that Diggs is sliding, so I can't take Diggs. It's like, I mean, stop and think. Like, do you really want to take Tank over Diggs? I want to take Tank, and I have Tank. Plenty of him. This is fine. Stroud even made JSN look good in college. Is Stroud the next kingmaker? Like, yeah. Propped up all of Wilson, Olave, and JSN at OSU. I love this. Oh, this says if you hover over the number, it gives you a full breakdown. Total drafts. Average first pick QB. There it is. Oh, you guys can't see it, but I can see it. I haven't done any big TK ones. I hear that the market is a little softer over there. The reality is that the UD stuff is just like easier for me, and I got that set up going, and I want to play where it's like easier, and there's like so many great offerings on UD that like I'm full up. Like I can't add any other drafts. I just entered 100 drafts, and I wanted to enter more the last time I went. I want to get into all of these different contests. So it's like, how much can you actually find the time and the ability to get into everything? George Pickens is going to be a first-round pick next year because they're signing Dak. Like I don't know what This Is Fine's comment is here, other than feels like the kind of thing that we were talking about guys that can be first-round picks next year, but just the idea of hype is what that made me think of. Who him says he likes Dell over Diggs doesn't mean he's out on Diggs either. It means that Dell has a bigger spike week potential, not that Diggs can't spike. I mean, I get this, and I'm not going to try to come at this too hard, but the first year that I was doing content in 2015, I got an opportunity to write at Roto World. I got an opportunity to meet Evan Silva in person and kind of like pitched him on some stuff, and he was working at Roto World. It was the coolest thing. The article that I came with for that I thought was like the best thing that I could put my best foot forward for my opportunity to get something guest published on NBC. I titled it The Upside of Receptions, and I made the case that both in PPR formats, this is half PPR to be fair, but in both full season perspectives and in weekly for DFS and that kind of stuff, and this was 2016, height of DFS, people don't recognize how much value there is in receptions. And the case I made on the weekly basis was at that time, people would talk about Tank Dell as a spike week, not Tank Dell, Des Bryant as a spike week player because he was a high ADOT, like explosive play kind of guy. We didn't even talk about air yards in that sense yet, but it was like Des Bryant has the ability to house a ball from anywhere. 50-yard touchdown, that's like 11 points right there, right? Like you get the catch, you get the 50 yards, you get the TD, it's 12 points. And he can have 3 touchdown games and all this stuff. And I went and looked at the highest scoring PPR games in the previous 10 seasons or whatever. And the highest scoring ones weren't, Des Bryant had like one that was up there that was like a 153 touchdown game. But almost exclusively, it was less about having the 3 touchdowns. It was more about racking up 12 to 14 catches. It was more about being able to get 15 to 20 targets, and then you could have this immense weekly spike potential. And the same is true on the season-long level. To have the massive seasons, it's not really about – Des Bryant would lead the league in TDs at that time, and that's what people loved. It wasn't about having 14 touchdowns compared to 8 touchdowns, because good receivers with huge volume are going to get at least like 7 or 8 usually. It was about whether or not you could get 180 plus targets and get 120 plus catches. And then you would have the yardage to back that up with all of those catches. The few touchdowns, I mean, they matter, and they matter on the weekly level more when you can really stack a bunch of touchdowns. But especially in PPR, you start talking about, 3 extra catches for 30 yards is the same as a touchdown. And so, an 8-catch game versus a 5-catch game, a 12-catch game. So, like, at that time, Keenan Allen had he was the young guy at the time I wrote this, because he came out in 2014 and had the amazing rookie year. He already had a couple, 14-catch games, and those were some of the best games in the sample in the previous 5 years. And he was a centerpiece of that column, was Keenan Allen versus sort of Des Bryant and these profiles. And Keenan was consistently better in those ways. Sorry, my wife just asked me if I wasn't recording, if I could do something for her. So I'm going to text her and say, unfortunately, I am. But yeah, that idea of the upside of receptions, the upside of volume is something that I do want to note here, because I think Tank Dell does have the potential in his role to have, he had a 14.4 ADOT last year, to have those kinds of splash plays, get downfield. I think he's going to have a lot of that. Big yardage moments. He's going to have touchdowns. He's going to be fun. There's going to be spike weeks. I hesitate to believe that Tank Dell is going to be like an 8-catch guy frequently this year, because I do think that it's going to be Diggs. It's going to be Nico that are earning big volume, and that Tank is probably more like a 100-target player in this game, in this offense, without an injury. An injury could really unlock him in a meaningful way. It's why I'm still taking a lot of him. It's one of the big upside scenarios for him. But like in my projections, I did 125 targets for both Nico and Diggs, 105 for Tank. That's not like a massive difference, but it is meaningful. And honestly, that was a little bit like market-based. If I'm being completely honest with you guys, I would project Diggs to out-target Nico if I was trying to do like what I think is most likely, and I would project Tank a little bit lower in this gap from Diggs, especially when I said 105 targets for Tank. I think it's possible he's only at like 100. I would probably have Diggs at least 130. Maybe that's too much certainty on that. And the market element of it, I'm willing to acknowledge, like, maybe the market's seeing something I'm not. But the way that I see these profiles, the biggest reason I'm breaking into this with this comment is you wrote, not that Diggs can't spike. And I think that's an important point. I mean, it's an important point for the Davante Adams thing. He had a really bad year last year, efficiency-wise. 175 targets matters. In Week 17, he had 21 targets, and he went off. Being able to earn 21 targets is a meaningful thing for spike weeks. Hoosier says we need to go back to using the basic metrics as a baseline. Like, honestly, I'm a little bit like, go back to Fantasy Douche's article from years ago that was targets are the lifeblood of fantasy scoring. Like, just reinforce that concept. Targets are the lifeblood. Like, you earn volume. And the guys that earn volume score points. Targets and fantasy points correlate at a really, really high rate. That is how all of this happens. This guy says he's a critter. I don't know. Says he's tempted to load up on Adams. AOC has better mechanics, people think. Could be a surprisingly good QB. I think he was actually decent down the stretch last year. Antonio Pierce took over, immediately installed him as a starter. He had a pretty good close to the year. He was good in Week 17 and 18 after most people were paying attention to Aiden O'Connell. I think he might play a decent amount this year. And if he isn't good, I think Gardner Minshew provides more stability than Jimmy Garoppolo. That clip that circulated that Adams was like not happy with Garoppolo was just more validation for me to this idea that part of the reason he was inefficient last year was not Davante Adams, but Jimmy Garoppolo, who was a terrible fit for Adams. Adams, the year prior, his first year with the Raiders, was successful largely because he started to hit on a lot of deep balls with Derek Carr. Jimmy Garoppolo, I wrote about this last offseason, and I was out on Adams, was such a trash deep ball thrower. It was just a bad fit. Like, Adams was a vertical winner in that offense for Josh McDaniels. It's a different offense now, and Adams can win underneath as well. He can win at all depths because he's an alpha, man. And now the quarterback play isn't going to be a horrible fit for what he's doing. They have both AOC and Minshew. Do I think DJ Moore going 30 spots ahead of Keenan is justified? Hell no. I'm doing my Bears projection right now. I started it this morning. I have to put in the players, in my template. Here, let's just share I have not made a pick yet. We're 35 minutes in. We're going for a record this year. I'll probably time out. Let's jump into my projections template. Just all sorts of madness here. Numbers. I just started my Bears projection. I have like 6 or 8 left that I haven't quite finished yet. I've been doing the projections with pods with Leone. Got to get through the rest of these, trying to knock them out. I haven't done anything to the baseline numbers here. So this is all like, you're seeing like the baseline TD rate on all of these players and target numbers. But this is like how all the white stuff I change, all the gray stuff is going to auto populate, but I still change some of this like rush TD rate. I just like QB rush TD rate tends to regress. Running back receiving TD rate. I still mess with this stuff, but I try not to mess with it too much. Receiver rushing numbers. We're talking about tiny samples. I'm not going to be like, oh, this guy's definitely going to be way more efficient as a runner on his 5 wide receiver carries. So anyway, the point I'm showing this for is when I get to a new team, like I haven't done Pittsburgh yet. So the Rams is the default. I have to go type in all the player names on the gold squares. And so I typically just go by ADP almost always. But just this morning, I got to the Bears and I was like, F that. I'm putting the player that I'm projecting for the most volume first. Because these are not the targets that I'm projecting. I have not done this projection yet. But I'm going to project Keenan Allen for more targets than DJ Moore. I like DJ Moore a lot. I'm going to have him very efficient, and I can see why people like him. But this idea that 30 spots of gap between these profiles, let's talk about why. Let's go to the targets per route run. Like DJ Moore, Keenan Allen. DJ Moore, good player. Targets per route runs that have peaked as high as 25.1, typically in the low 20s. Strong yards per targets. Gives him some good yards per out runs that have maxed out about 2.3 last year was a career high. Keenan Allen. Targets per out runs that are the low side is more like the high side for DJ Moore. The yards per target's not necessarily a strong part of that's because the ADOTs are typically below average. 11 plus, 11.1 is the average for a wide receiver. He's going to be sub-average. DJ Moore bounces around some, but often is above average. So that's going to impact yards per target. But that doesn't mean that Keenan Allen is bad or inefficient. He's actually had really good efficiency relative to his ADOT when we depth adjust. He was also a 2.3 plus yards per out run guy last year. In fact, last year, Keenan Allen's yards per out run was better than any year of DJ Moore's career, even though he's not a big yards per target guy because the targets per out run plus the yards per target is how you get yards per out run, and his targets per out run are that elite every year. Last year was a career high, I think. I can tell you down here because I have one of these built out where it goes to the beginning of these guys' careers. So 1 year he had this ridiculous number, but he only ran 16 routes. That's the year he tore his ACL. Had 6 targets in the first half of a game. I had so much Keenan Allen that year. 6 targets in the first half of a game and then tore his ACL in week 1. Was about to have a 200 target season. But yeah, this is a career high for him. 27.5 from last year. In 2021, I'm scrolling around all over. In 2021, his yards per out run was down to a career low, 1.78, or not career low. His sophomore season, he had a big sophomore slump way back in 2014. But 1.78 is basically the low end you get for Keenan Allen. Certainly, it's going to fall off. The end of his career is going to look worse, and whenever that comes, it's going to look worse. But 1.78 on the low end is it's fine. It's consistent. I don't know the point that I'm trying to drive home here other than Keenan Allen is good. So is DJ Moore. I think they're both good. But I particularly when you look at the targets per out run, the other point I want to emphasize on DJ Moore is these targets per out run have come in offenses that have had no competition, dude. DJ Moore's biggest secondary receiver competition in his career that he's had to fight for targets through is like Curtis Samuel. He had, what's that one guy? Devin Funchess for a while. This is something I've looked back on a little bit. Obviously last year it was Darnell Mooney. I mean, Keenan Allen hasn't had a ton either, but Mike Williams and some other guys throughout his career have definitely been around. But he's also put up alpha numbers, like you should when you don't have big target competition. DJ Moore, these numbers are like, they're good, and I think he's going to continue to be good. But to me, it's like, okay, this guy's now on your team. Who's going to earn the big volume? Let's do the same thing with Stefon Diggs real quick. Look at the weighted targets per out run. I mentioned like the targets per out run have been really consistent the last 4 or 5 years. Look at the yards per out run since 2018, haven't been below 1.9. Let's go to the longer window for Diggs. Early career stuff was really good. 2018 was the 1 year with the low ADOT. It dropped. And then the next year it was 15.6. I was talking through this. It was really weird what Minnesota did these 2 years. You can see how it impacted his yards per target. He still caught 100 balls this year. So like in PPR leagues, he was actually still a solid player, even though this is his worst yards per out run year. And then the next year, he actually was like less productive in fantasy, I think. He ran fewer routes. He had this really good yards per target, really good yards per out run as a deep threat, 15.6. He never should have been a pure deep threat either. 50.6 is a very high ADOT for a player like Diggs. Like, why are you not giving him stuff around the line of scrimmage at all now? And then when he went to Buffalo, it was like, oh yeah, we're just going to do both. And the big thing is this has been consistent. The target earning has been consistent. The yards per target has fluctuated. These are still good. Even when the yards per target's down, it's still strong. Yards per out run. I mean, you got to be really confident this guy's just bad now. Davante Adams, 29% targets per out run last year. Yards per target dropped all the way to 6.7 after years of all this stuff, right? 8+. Yards per out run was still 1.97. Are you confident that he's a 6.7 yards per target player now? Because this is huge. This is elite. This is huge. These are even better than the stuff I was saying about Diggs. He's been a 30+ market share guy for 4 straight years, Davante Adams. And people are like, that doesn't matter. Okay. I mean, the market, like I said, I'm being a little bit over the top with that because the market is valuing Davante Adams. He's going in the second round. But like the ability to put up these types of targets per out run numbers matters in fantasy football. I'm so at a loss for how people are missing this. The next generation, like I joked on Twitter today, is losing recipes, man. Like targets still matter. They're always going to matter. Let's make some picks. And then use advanced metrics to sort through baseline. Yeah, we need to use basic metrics as a baseline, then use advanced to sort through the baseline. Absolutely. Good question here. Why is autocorrect changing baseline to Vaseline for you, Hoosier? That's we're gonna need. How do I feel about taking 2 or 3 Houston receivers in the same draft? I feel fine about it. It is a lot of draft capital. I try not to do it too much. I do that more with like the Kansas City guys who I think are all underpriced. You know, like I'll do it less when I take Kelsey, but sometimes Kelsey and Worthy or Kelsey and Rice. But often I'll do like Worthy and Rice together because at the point that those guys go, it's like they're, to me, the clearest upside plays. And it's just a bet on Kansas City's passing volume and kind of a bet against Kelsey. If Kelsey's not in the offense, if he gets hurt, if he does break down this year, you can see how both Worthy and Rice could elevate. I still am okay with the Houston thing because it's sort of a bet against the third guy. So like if I take both Nico and Diggs, which I've done, it's just a bet that Tank Dell is coming back from an injury is just not necessarily what people want him to be. Or if you take Nico and Tank, you're betting against Diggs, right? Which is like, I could be totally wrong on that stuff. But again, the point of emphasis for me is that Houston doesn't agree with the market, the fantasy market. And people are, I think, it's kind of a mess, in my opinion. Sorry, I was reading aside. Ping. Keenan had an interview asking him what he'll do in 2 wide receiver sets. He said he switches to the X. I think that's a fascinating point. worry about him coming off the field is probably misguided. I definitely think early in the year they're going to have a Dunze off the field in 2 receiver sets. There's a lot of talk about this being the Keenan Allen, DJ Moore show, and they want the vets for the rookie quarterback. Like, a Dunze will be the guy that rotates. This idea that Keenan Allen's going to come off the field so that Odunze can play every snap in his first games as a rookie isn't consistent with. I mean, that's the other thing about young players is I've always loved drafting rookies. They've always been good picks at costs, but now they're so expensive that you have to talk about the fact that they don't play right away. Kurain did a great research a couple years ago that showed that rookies don't run routes at the same level as other like later year players, even themselves relative to their future selves. He showed that when rookies hit, they tend to hit on efficiency, which makes them still reasonable bets on efficiency, but that is a part of the equation you need to consider. I do think the superstars are going to run routes right away. I think Marvin Harrison's going to run a lot of routes in week 1. They took him super, super high. Jamar Chase ran a lot of routes in week 1 too. But I also think there's this element of like first read target, play design, calling the plays and all that stuff. I think part of why we saw Jamar Chase get more consistent volume late in his rookie year, and I use Chase because we see later production from rookies across the board. Some of that is the playing time stuff. I've talked about this before. AJ Brown played about 40% of the snaps for the first month of his season, about 60% of the snaps for the second month, and then about week 9, he actually started playing full time. And then he was wide receiver 2 from whatever that point to the end of the season because he's an absolute star. Some teams will just bring along their rookies slowly, even if they're really good. And Rashee Rice last year didn't play full-time for the Chiefs until week 14, even though his targets per out run stuff was elite. He was consistently earning volume and being productive, but they were holding him back intentionally, I think. I would argue they've made a lot of comments over the last few years about being cognizant of their playoff runs, and they've held back plays and offensive design stuff. I would argue that the Chiefs were sort of slow playing the regular season with Rashee Rice. And there's maybe a concern they do that with Xavier Worthy as well, but they're not trying to put their best foot forward. It's not crazy to me that the timing of Rice finally getting the full-time role, week 14, it gave him 4 weeks of full-time snaps before the playoffs. And then he was the full-time guy for the 4 playoff weeks as well. They made sure he was ready for that, but they didn't rush him into it and, make it obvious that that's what their offense was going to look like in the postseason. I think they intentionally slow played the middle part of the season. They weren't trying to get their best receivers, their best formations on the field in week 8 because they were thinking about week 19 and week 20 and week 21. So they waited until they could prepare for the playoffs, basically. The Chiefs are treating the regular season like the preseason. That's where we're at. I don't think that happens with all their players or will happen with all their players or any of that stuff, but it exists to a certain degree. They admitted they slow played Travis Kelce's routes last year a little bit in the regular season. But yeah, the rookies are sometimes just slow to play, and that's why we see back-weighted production, the A.J. Brown example. The second example, and I do think there's a lot of validity to this, is even for the players that play from week 1 heavily. Jamar Chase and Justin Jefferson were both breakouts in their first month, and they played the whole year heavily, but we still see some back-weighted production, and I think it's because it takes some time to establish enough respect within the locker room, consistency, all of those elements, to where they're going to draw plays up for you. And you're going to be the first read, and that's a crucial element of target share. You're going to need some first read targets. You're going to need that stuff that Davante Adams is getting from week 1. The offense is going to be built around getting Davante Adams the ball. And unlike, veteran running backs that can lose that over the course of a year, it's a lot harder for a Davante Adams type to lose that. I'd be a little worried about it with Keenan Allen as they start to develop Rome Odunze later in the year, that he loses some of those first read targets and some of that stuff. But I still feel pretty confident he can earn volume on the non-first read stuff. Adams, again, doesn't have any competition. Eventually, yes, they're going to start to do some design stuff for Brock Bowers, but it's different at tight end. And I don't think whatever Bowers gets late in the year, I don't think is going to meaningfully, there's room in passing games for multiple good receivers. And the Raiders, it's just, there's Jacoby Myers as well. There's Michael Mayer. It just gets so thin at like the fourth receiving weapon. You're just, there's nothing there after like the fourth. And so like, yeah, Brock Bowers could start to get like a 20% first read target share, and that would be awesome. But like, there could still be plenty of room for 20% is not 100%. There's still plenty of room for Davante Adams. There's always room for 2 weapons in a pass game. But yeah, I mean, the ways that young players have to develop that type of trust with their quarterbacks, that ability to earn the play caller's trust, to get the play designs drawn up for them, that stuff is just ignored. It's not talked about enough. All right. This is an eliminator. It started with Puka Nacua, Chris Olave, Stefon Diggs, and then Kelsey. I already have 2 week 6 guys. I already have a KC guy here. Probably not going Hollywood Brown, but we have Keenan there as the next best pick. I guess you guys like this better because you can actually see, although the draft caddy's in the way too. There, let's do it like that. It's probably Keenan Allen because there's only 2 teams on a week 7 bye. I do think that Jaden Reed is intriguing here with the week 10 bye. I want to take Keenan for this eliminator build. Let's go. So this one only has, oh shit, that one only has 10 minutes remaining. I wonder if I timed out on anything. Let's see on my phone notifications if I have not gotten the 10-minute notification on the phone yet. So this one, I'm going to get it right now. Heads up, you have 10 minutes remaining or whatever. Yeah, heads up, 10 minutes left to make your pick. I just got that. So this was the one that was closest to timing out. If I would have talked about target share for a little while longer, you guys would have seen a timeout. This is a slow puppy. I'm more willing to make some detours in the slow puppies. I'm going to talk about this a little bit today. Certainly, I went Brees. I'm trying to build a few more Brees teams. I've got a lot of Bijan Beggs. I've decided I want to get some of the first-round running backs, some exposure to those guys, some builds that direction. I'm not taking anything in the running back dead zone. Great recording with Sean Siegel yesterday on the running back dead zone that relates to everything in fantasy football. Our next 3 Stealing Banana shorts are that conversation, and then there's the long, full audio episode that we'll release as well. That's one I would recommend listening to, the full audio. It's, I think, a huge part of all of these questions that you guys, are asking, and how to play a lot of this different stuff. But this start, Brees, Nico, Zay, Travis Kelce definitely leaves wide receiver as the need in round 5. Jaden Reed is sitting there. I haven't wanted to take a lot of Jaden Reed. I've expressed concern about Jaden Reed. Sean has been very high on Jaden Reed. I've even taken to saying that he's not going to get me on Jaden Reed. And yet I've started to take him a lot in the 5th round because this is a window where I don't want Calvin Ridley. I'm taking some Chris Godwin as well, but I don't see as much upside with that pick. And then often, like, Keenan Allen's off the board. Sometimes I'm Reed versus Hollywood Brown, and I don't like Hollywood Brown that much either. Or like McLaurin or Kirk can fall sometimes. And again, like, Reed is the 2nd-year player. There's not, if he was going in this range, I was taking Xavier Worthy a lot, but Worthy's price has slid too. So I'm getting him in the 6th now. Don't need to chase him up. Don't need to chase, Rashee Rice up that high yet. But if these guys were going like right next to Reed, I would probably be taking them over Reed. But especially like for the bye element too, there's not a lot of good receivers with the week 10 bye. It's nice to get him into some of these builds. It's just a stability piece. I do think he is a high floor play. He was really good as a rookie. And if I'm wrong about what his true ceiling could look like in this offense, I could see being more wrong on him than on like Chris Godwin, who like I have a pretty good feel for what Chris Godwin is. I'm taking some Godwin too, and I think there's ways that Godwin could hit a ceiling this year. I'm pretty confident Ridley's not it in this range. Hollywood Brown I've taken a few times as well. But the point is, I'm often still looking to take a receiver in the round 5 range, and the round 5 range right now is barren at receiver outside of Jaden Reed. So taking a decent amount of Reed. Let's get these other slow puppies in where I have the clock way down. This is another one where I went away from the receiver a little bit. I'm trying some different builds in the puppy. Christian McCaffrey, I went Diggs and Davante at the 2-3. I actually did this intentionally to get a little bit of a different texture to the build where Diggs has fallen as Davante has risen. And so I felt like there's probably not a lot of teams that took Diggs and Davante together at the 2-3. I know there's some teams that took Diggs at the 2-3 with McCaffrey, but I kind of bet that was before Davante was going this high. Davante rose largely as a correlation piece with CeeDee Lamb. And so I'm taking him as, an uncorrelated CeeDee Lamb thing here. And then I get Jalen Hurts to slide all the way through. So I take him. Not entirely sure why I took Andrews other than just structurally liking a tight end at that 4-5 turn because I can't get one at the 6-7 turn. That's what it is. Kittle's not going to come back to the 6-7 turn. Ingram didn't even come back to the 6-7 turn. So I took Andrews at the 4-5 turn. McBride was already off the board. Kincaid had gone at 403 in this draft. So I took Andrews at a spot where it was just Andrews, Pitts, and Kittle left. I was pretty confident those tight ends were not going to come back to me. I could have just went Pitts that high, but again, I can get better prices on Pitts. I decided, Andrews and Diggs also correlate, so that might have been a consideration for me as well at the last turn. But then that makes this turn wide receiver, almost without question. Deontay Johnson is sitting there, my guy. I'm obviously going to take him there. You're going to see a lot of him on my teams in this run through as well. The other pick for me here, I think Brian Thomas is a very reasonable pick at this point here. Jordan Addison, we got to kind of get better prices on at this point. Who knows what's going to happen there? But Jackson Smith and Jigba is a guy that I want to definitely proactively get. And so I'm going to not go after BTJ in this draft where, I've said before, now that BTJ is going in the 70s, if I can get him in the 7th round, I definitely want to have some exposure to him at that cost. But for me, JSN is still going to be ahead of BTJ, 8 or 9 times out of 10. And I understand that people are going to have a really hard time with that, but it's largely because of the collegiate prospect target earning, production, profile. I don't think JSN's failure as a rookie is going to be the whole story of his career. And I do think that, BTJ specific type of ceiling is probably not massive as a rookie based on his target earning in college. We've talked through him a lot. So here I am on the clock in round 7 in another slow puppy. I started Lamb, Davante, Neighbors on this one, and then got ETN a little bit behind ADP at the 4-5 turn. Typically not taking a running back in that pocket, but decided in this draft with that group of receivers that I just talked about being all that was available. It was Hollywood, Terry McLaurin, Keenan Allen, Godwin, and Jaden Reed that were available at the end of the 4th. I decided I'd take ETN at a little bit of an ADP discount. I remember seeing this. Hurts fell all the way to the late 4th in this one as well, went one pick ahead of me to the Barkley manager. And I was certainly not pleased. I was like, man, that sucks because I did do the Lamb Davante thing here and I could have got that stacked up. Instead, I take ETN. I take Trey McBride if I can get McBride at the 4-5 turn. He's slid again. He was going up near the 3-4 turn for a while. I'm getting him so much in this batch of drafts as well. Trey McBride, my tight end 1, don't understand why I can get him at pick 50. Going to keep drafting him. We've talked about that enough as well. I get Deontay in the late 6th. I think he's just such a nice, comfortable click when you've done this kind of stuff. When you've done the ETN McBride and now my wide receiver 4. And Neighbors is another one of those rookies where I got to be, cautious of the actual route volume and the actual overall production. I think he's a true efficiency breakout bet and could be just electric in that way when he does hit. But I also have to be cautious of the scenarios where he's at times just not really getting a lot and having really floor games. And so I'm sort of trying to build in some other floor. Plus, I think, as we talked about with Deontay, a little bit more ceiling than people understand. Again, target volume. This is a guy that go look at the targets per out run charts and everything should not be going 71. It's just, there's nobody else at this range. And this is the way I've been saying it's all offseason for him. There's nobody else at this range of receiver that you can make a reasonable case for 150, 160 targets. It doesn't mean that somebody won't do that. Puka Nacua came from the end of the draft and did that. But it's really, really, really hard to make a case for basically any receiver after this point to have the target earning ability. And for Deontay Johnson, it's not hard to make that case. In fact, it's relatively easy. They were pretty pass heavy last year. They're going to play from behind. Adam Thielen, this pass game was so bad. Adam Thielen ran the 4th most routes in the NFL last year. I think Deontay Johnson's going to take that. He's going to run a lot of routes. He's going to be their guy. They went and traded for him. And he's going to earn volume with little competition the way that he always has. And yeah, I just don't understand why you can get him at 70 with that target earning profile. So now we have a running back, we have a tight end, we have 4 receivers. We're not going to be wanting to get any more receivers at the 8-9 turn. There's not, there's an Evan Ingram option here, which I'm not like completely out on. I'm trying to get a little bit more of him. I have McBride, but it would close out tight end, and I don't mind taking 2 tight ends through 7 rounds. I already have ETN on the Jacksonville play, could make Trevor Lawrence, one of my favorite mid-round QBs, a priority. But I don't think 4 receivers is enough, basically, for what I expect to see at 8-9, what I expect to see at 10-11. That's been a big talking point, and that's a big thing that we need to talk about on this stream as well. People talking about the wide receiver avalanche, how to approach it. A lot of different conversation points about what to do with all these wide receivers. That's a big thing that Sean and I discussed in that conversation about the running back dead zone and basically how that impacts all of structure. I'm still very much an advocate of getting the 5th receiver here, that you need upside at all positions in your roster. The big case that I've continued to make about the running back position in the dead zone and where we're at with it is that the running backs in the double-digit rounds are going to score points this year. It's just going to happen. We broke it down on that stream. I wrote about it recently. The lack of high-end running backs is your proof of that there's so many ambiguous backfields. There's more backfields than ever where you're not even taking a single running back until the double-digit rounds. And some of those are backfields that we as a fantasy community are collectively high on for how big the pie is, how many total points can be scored. Denver. Javonte Williams has been pushed so far down that Denver's backfield, which could be one of the highest scoring backfields combined, has no running backs going in the first 10 rounds, or like Javonte is going on like the 10th now. The Chargers, we all expect the Harbaugh to be very run heavy, but even if they're less run heavy, you have Justin Herbert. You're going to set up good situations. No running backs going meaningfully high. And I'm not saying that you should chase Gus Edwards up the board, but I am saying from a where do points come from in these contests perspective, points are going to come from late. The Cowboys is the 3rd one. Like, they're going to score rushing touchdowns. They're a good offense. They play fast. They score touchdowns, man. Doesn't mean I'm drafting Ezekiel Elliott, but I am trying to consider taking a little more Dowdle, or at least where I can get exposure to some of the Cowboy. I'm taking a lot of Vidal. I'm taking a lot of the Broncos backs. I've taken a decent amount of J.K. Dobbins as well to try to get exposure to a backfield where I think there's going to be points. And I think the market is so scared off the individual profiles that they're just not drafting it. They're pretending like there's not going to be running back points late. There's going to be. There's nothing I feel more confident about this year than that there will be running back points late. And so when you think about how that impacts what we learn about structural lessons, like this is the layup this year. And people are trying to predict what's 2024 going to look like and how do I play it. And they're wanting to attack the running back dead zone. And they're wanting to take these like low ceiling players that you're going to be able to replicate with late round running backs if you get late round right. The best builds are going to have production from late round running backs. They have to. Do you guys just think running backs aren't going to score this year? There's none going in the high rounds, right? Like, I mean, I'm asking that to not you, the audience, but to a generic person who is advocating for strategies that include more running backs early because wide receivers have gotten so expensive. That's not how it works. Where do the points come from? What is replicable late relative to early? The later that running backs go, the more that non-elite running back scores are replicable late through the best ball element. Right? Remember that team that I always talk about that Pete Overzet and Eric Bienfor got into the finals and got like 10th overall or whatever it was? It was that Frankenstein running back build where they got the different production they needed at different times throughout the season. They got the spot starts from Alexander Mattison. They got the late production from Sony Michel and Rashad Penny. There's some other little elements built in throughout that added some stability, and they got the spike weeks, and their overall running back scoring mirrored the non-elite but solid, fifth round pick types, like a good Isaiah Pacheco year this year. I'm not saying you're going to be able to build the perfect running back room that everything goes right for you with every single one of your builds, but I am saying that the best teams can do that, that's going to be possible. And so that's something you should be striving for, because that's what allows you the most firepower, the most upside, because what's not replicable consistently is late round wide receiver ceiling. That's why the wide receivers keep getting pushed up. And the more they get pushed up, the tighter the wide receiver window gets, the more you have to get that wide receiver upside that we are able to identify better collectively over 10, 15 years of data. This is not made up. This is not big wide receiver throwing crap at you. That's where the upside at wide receiver comes from, right? And I've seen creative approaches to this, but to me, I can replicate every other pick here. I mean, the Ingram thing actually, I think, is the one. If you're going to detour, it's not to take a bunch of running backs, it's to take 2 elite tight ends, because I do think that's a really interesting cost upside equation that's not getting discussed enough. Because even really strong tight end seasons, people are like, well, if you take Trey McBride, you need him to be the star. And it's like, yeah, I do, but he's not going to hit my lineup every single week. Even really strong tight ends don't have like a floor of production that's so high that they're hitting your lineup every single week, no matter what. And even if they are, like getting close to that, say 80% of the weeks, because even the best wide receivers don't necessarily hit your lineup every single week. This idea that like you have to punt, I'm refuting this idea that like you have to punt tight end 2 if you take a McBride. There's going to be some weeks where he doesn't produce well, because there's weeks that good receivers don't produce well. And we have enough receivers in our builds that people cover those weeks. Like CeeDee Lamb's going to have a couple down weeks. Maybe not CeeDee Lamb. Like there's a couple receivers that can be that consistent. But there's like 3 or 5. There's not 20. So Devonta Smith's going to have some down weeks. Well, I hope I can cover that with Deontay Johnson or whatever. At tight end, if you play it as a Trey McBride and nothing late, when he has the down weeks, you're probably not getting production from the late round. I mean, it's just the reality. If you and more likely the reality for these elite tight ends, even if they are really good throughout the year and have some spike weeks, is that they do have some down games throughout the season, at which point, you're taking lower tight end scores a lot of the time when you've just punted tight end 2. If you take like an Evan Ingram with it, you're hoping that the puzzle pieces fit together well enough that you're maximizing tight end scoring in a huge way. Trey McBride has a really good year, but also that's only like 75% usable weeks. Evan Ingram has a really good year. Maybe that's 70% usable weeks. Those 70%, I'm hoping, overlap with the 25% that McBride doesn't do well, which is something we can't typically control, but we're trying to control. Then there's still overlap with another 45% of Evan Ingram's weeks that are on weeks where McBride was good. And that's the amount of time that I think, less than half, that I think I'm considering tight end in the flex. Because the big counter to 2 elite tight ends is like, well, why would you want tight end in the flex? You would always want a wide receiver in the flex. Wide receivers score more. It's like, okay, well, I'm not actually considering a tight end in the flex 100% of the time. I just probably gave high estimates. I'm probably considering a tight end in the flex like 30% of the time. At which point it's like, okay, fine. Like if they're both good on those weeks, like great. But I'm more trying to make sure that my tight end score is actually strong 17 weeks, because I don't think people understand that even an elite tight end who has an elite season isn't an elite play every single week for an entire season. And then you're like, well, then why is he worth drafting? Because other tight ends don't score at all. It's a marginal benefit over what other tight ends offer. The point is the baseline is lower at tight end. And so I do think it's a really intriguing thing to think through in terms of having 2 tight ends on your roster and using a lot of extra draft capital to go after that if you don't think you want to just hammer 7 straight wide receivers. You can mix in a running back, but this idea that you can start to get less with the number of receivers you have and get higher or heavier with the number of running backs you have, I'll be surprised if that wins. There's more conversations about that on the Stealing Bananas Dead Zone running back episodes this week that are really strong, in my opinion. Some of my favorite stuff that I've done this year. Go over to receiver here. I want to take the receiver 5 for all the reasons I just said. Addison's a guy that's tough to take. Behind that, there's not much else. This is when Ladd McConkey makes a lot of sense to me. I'm definitely willing to be in on him at this cost once those other guys are off the board, like the JSNs and everything. So I go ahead and pick him in that draft. Let's see where else I'm about to time out. Okay, I'm nowhere. Let's grab another slow puppy real quick with an hour. I have Kyler Stard here. I'm right about at cost for him. So this is one where I started in the first 6 rounds, 5 receivers and Trey McBride. I went Justin Jefferson, Davante Adams, Stefon Diggs, Jaden Reed, Deontay Johnson. I'll also note that this is 5 receivers where I feel really strong about that veteran element of volume that I was talking about. These are established players. If they hit in ways where I think the weekly floor is very strong. It's not the rookies and the more pure like upside spike week bets. And so, yeah, I feel perfectly fine going away from receiver for a long while, frankly. At this point, there's not a lot of receivers I want to be going to anyway. This is the type of receiver room that people are acting like is too much firepower right now. And this is the type of receiver room that wins. I feel really good about this team. I also got McBride built in there. I'll be interested to see how it plays out. Certainly could be wrong. But now I get to build in some QB ceiling. What's fascinating here is I have Kyler Stard because I took McBride and I was like, okay, I'll get this Arizona stack, but I also have Diggs on this team and Stroud fell through to pick 77. I've seen him fall a decent amount. I'm not sure if I assume I didn't star him because I either didn't see Diggs or didn't expect him to be here. But I'm going to take Stroud over Kyler, even though I really like Kyler this year. I do think Arizona is a team that is being overlooked by the market as well, because the market is pretty low on them. But I think they're going to be good because I think Trey McBride's really good. I think James Conner's probably a little better than people think. Marvin Harrison's going to be an impactful player. I think Kyler Murray being healthy for the first time in a season where he doesn't have Cliff Kingsbury weighing him down will be interesting, because this offense with Drew Petzing last year was interesting. I mean, they were able to do some interesting stuff with Josh Dobbs, and then even after Kyler came back, he was kind of still, working back slowly in a lost season, but was good. It was interesting. I think you could see why Kyler used to be a top 5 quarterback pick this year. But it requires the market to be wrong on Arizona. Some of the stuff I've talked about with Anthony Richardson, and to keep circling back on that, go listen to the podcast with Leone on the AFC South. Don't actually think Anthony Richardson's the worst pick in fantasy. I said that while we were in the draft with Jacob, and he was trying to set up to take Richardson at the 4-5 turn ahead of ADP. And I was like, that's where it gets crazy, where you're like setting up to take him ahead of ADP. I think his ADP is aggressive already. And so I think you want to get good prices when you get exposure to him. I do still want to have exposure to Anthony Richardson. If I thought he was the worst pick in fantasy, I wouldn't have any exposure to him. But I do think the rushing upside has pushed people to where, that's probably not the way that he actually scores is probably not as easy of a way for him to break fantasy as I think as his ADP indicates. Meanwhile, Kyler, Jaden Daniels obviously is the one that's come up. Caleb Williams had back-to-back 10-plus rush TD seasons in college and 6 as a true freshman as a rotational quarterback at Oklahoma. 27 total rush TDs in college. Not a huge rush yardage guy, but I think that's probably a skill for him in the red zone where he's able to make some reads and then run for the end zone. And I think the potential for him to carry a high rush TD rate isn't meaningfully different than the potential for Anthony Richardson to. I think you can make the case that Richardson's is higher, but by comparison, Richards' one main season in college, he had 9 rush TDs. He had 12 total in his college, but he didn't play a ton. He had 4 in the very small sample last year, which is the thing that people are really clinging to. So anyway, I don't want to make this a Anthony Richardson stream again, but the point I've made on him and I made with the Jacob episode is that if you're wrong on if the market is wrong on the Colts touchdowns overall as an offense, then Richardson can be a big hit. Right now they have a pretty low number on, look ahead lines and everything on expected points for the Colts. I think you need more touchdowns, both, for him to get rushing. And I've argued that I think Jonathan Taylor probably runs for more TDs than Richardson because both of Richardson's injuries last year, I did go back and look, both of them came on design runs. I think Steichen's going to be a little bit gun shy on that. One of them came on a design run in the red zone where he scored a touchdown. He got a concussion because he got hit as he was crossing the goal line. I do think they're going to lean on their high-priced elite running back in the red zone in those ways. I think you need the overall team touchdowns to be low, in the expectation of the market to be low also for Richardson's pass TDs, because I think you need, his passing production to be better than how it projects. And I'm making that point to say it's a similar deal for Kyler. I guess I see it more with the Arizona offense. I'm pretty excited about the Arizona offense. Maybe that's unfair because Steichen's a great coach. I'm probably being this is why I keep the Colts thing. I keep going back to it because I feel like I'm not weighing everything right, because I do feel confident about Shane Steichen. I do feel confident about that offense generally, just not necessarily specifically. When I start getting into the specifics of Richardson's injuries and that stuff, I start to worry about how they're going to do things. And it's you know what? Probably being overly specific on that. Anyway, I think the Cardinals are a good bet to outperform market expectations. I see that more. And so I see scenarios where Kyler actually has decent rush TDs, decent rush yards, and then throws for a lot of touchdowns. But when I did my projections for them, I tend to stick to market rates on touchdowns. I don't deviate massively because I don't want to have a bunch of bias in it. It did bring, it made my McBride projection look weaker than I think it otherwise could have been, in large part because his touchdowns were weaker than what Kelsey's or Sam Laporta's would look like in those offenses. So at similar target numbers, I actually had McBride for more targets than those two. Or maybe not Kelsey, but definitely more than Laporta. But Laporta still came out a little bit better than McBride in the projections, and it was almost purely because of touchdowns. All right. I think we're caught up on the 1 hour drafts. Oh my God, there's still so many drafts. I have just been absolutely ranting this morning, having a lot of fun with it. I know you guys have always said some nice things when I just let myself go a little bit. Let's get into the comments a little. I want to get caught up on the chat, which I'm an hour behind on. I like this comment from Terrence. If the masses agreed with you, where would your edge be? That's a very fair point. I feel like hating on older players is a cop-out take. A lot of analysts do too, because even if the player goes off this year, they can say, well, next year he will be even older, so for sure next year. I think that's one reasonable thought on the mental side of all of it. I've been seeing Kelsey go at 46, which to me is crazy. I'm going to tweet this stream out. Our numbers are a little lower today, which is, I think, probably in part. Well, it's probably in part because you got so many streams out there. I'm sure there's other ones going on right now. But also probably in part because in part because I took some time off recently, and the regular cadence and all that stuff is very helpful for the algorithm and all of that kind of stuff. So, yeah. Anyway, I wanted to retweet that, give it a chance to get some more people in here. I appreciate this question. This is the kind of thing that I could spend so much time on. So I don't know if I can get into it here, but 4-point per passing TD auction league. QBs get bonus points for 200 plus and 300 plus yards. Here's some QBs I should target. I'll just quickly say, like, fast-paced offenses, high volume offenses where, you see a lot of yardage. The guys that, like, I'm going to release my projections in the next week, the guys that I project for a lot of pass yards, because the 4-point per passing TD is less like, Jordan Love is a guy that you could run a high pass TD rate, but probably not as much yardage because they tend to go away from the pass when they get ahead. Like he had some games that were like not even 30 pass attempts. Dak Prescott's the opposite of that. They're going to throw 50 times sometimes, right? They're always going to throw. They don't have good running backs. So the bonus for the yardage stuff, I'm looking at like a Dak as a guy that bumps up. Establish the Edge Part 3 just dropped. I recorded that with Leone yesterday. That was a lot of fun. I love when I see these like an hour late. That makes sense. Thanks for breaking down the thought. This was at 8:35 my time. It's 9:25 my time now. That was literally 50 minutes ago. This says, Gretch, do you mind if I reference somebody else's stream? Of course not. I'm so bad about the streaming environment and like what is going on out there. I do know that there's Swolecasts on Wednesdays you guys have referenced, and so I've considered maybe I should go to like Tuesdays. You guys should tell me, like, what's a good day for you guys to tune in and you actually want to hang. Kitmo says, this is really cool. Never seen you share this before. This is probably the projections sheet. I doubt I have shared it before. Built that a few years ago. Have tweaked it over the years. It's I think it's really cool too. Maybe it's been asked, but where are you taking Addison now? Pick 90 or so, or is that still early? I think that's fine. I think he still falls within like the players with upside, like the wide receiver window stuff. Like I don't think you just give up on Addison's profile. It does seem likely he's probably going to get suspended and miss a little bit of time, but I'm not taking like Romeo Dobbs over him at this point, This is asking if I have something for every player. The answer is whatever it is. The answer is yes. I have something for every player 5 different ways. I don't know if that's the yard per out run thing or the projection thing or some of the other stuff, the college stuff that I have. But yeah, I got lookups for lots of stuff. How do you calculate weighted targets per out run? That's a fun question. I tried to mimic Whopper, which is Josh Hermsmeyer's This is the formula. It's Josh Hermsmeyer's metric that looks at like the target share side of things, not per route run. So you have target share and air yard share, and then it's weighted like 2-to-1 targets to air yards. Targets are more important, like 2-to-1, relatively close to that. And so this is the formula that as I tweaked it, like it put it on a good scale, similar to a Whopper scale, and it gave targets per out run that sort of 2-to-1 weight. I have to multiply it by 20 because air yards per out run is meaningfully higher just as a stat, right? Like you can have 3 or 4 air yards per route, whereas targets per out, you're like 0.3. Not most guys don't have 3 or 4 air yards per route, but actually I think some guys do because you can have like 1,500 air yards and like 500 routes, right? And then, your targets per route are going to be like 0.3 or something. So you multiply it by 20 to get this like 2-to-1 element for most profiles, and then you divide by 12 to get it back on that Whopper scale. So that puts it where, it looks a little bit like Whopper. You start to get up in the 0.7s, 0.8s, it's really, really good. You get in the 0.6s, it's strong. 0.5, 0.4 is a little weaker. That's the formula, though. Is this sheet your own or is it public? All these are are my own. What's up, Ness? Glad to have you in. If you're still here. But yeah, these are all sort. I don't know what sheet this is in reference to. Certainly be open to making some stuff public, but almost all of these are things that I've built and had over the years. Let's see. Ross says people are so scared to draft rookies due to a lack of certainty early in the season. I mean, my take on this is like comments from 2021 for 500, Alex. Like that was true 3 years ago. It's rookie ADP suggests that's not true anymore. People are not scared to draft rookies. I mean, actually, I think they're erroneously scared on late round rookie running backs. I think there are some rookies that this actually does fit for, and I hear your point, like the Dunze stuff. Relative to his profile, Dunze is getting this, the lack of certainty in his role and his volume and all that stuff. So yeah, I hear that. Beatwad says that here. He says, Eberflus has said that they're lining Rome up everywhere on the field. He profiles more as an outside guy than Keenan. Prospect of similar pedigree to Neighbors in MHJ going 4 rounds later. I'm buying. I don't know that his analytical profile is actually quite that similar to Neighbors in MHJ, but I do really like him. Obviously, I'm a Husky guy. He also says, let me clarify. Eberflus said the first part. I had the Keenan part in terms of him profiling more as an outside guy. I think Keenan actually does profile fine as an outside guy. Oh, that's funny. Your number has to look stupid because he had one get canceled after contest closed. So you had 149 BBMs. That's rough, man. You just didn't get a max it by one. I just can't imagine doing 149 and not getting to 150. That's rough, buddy. Think Gretch might time out at this pace. I'm trying to. Am I backing off Garrett Wilson with all the Adams trade buzz? I don't know what that buzz is. Dan Orlovsky said it. I don't know that there's actually like a real thing on it. I'm not backing off Garrett Wilson for really any reason. I have a lot of Garrett Wilson. Even if Adams got there, I would talk myself into it just being better for Wilson, I guess. It couldn't be because Adams is such a target earner and he has the connection with Rodgers. It would have to be bad for Wilson. But I still think Wilson would have a really good year. I think Garrett Wilson's really, really good. We've talked about this. Surprises no one. Kind of still scrolling through the chat. We got Willis, our guy. He has so much Zeke. That was Ben when I was talking about the running back production in the late rounds. I mean, he wrote, it's definitely going to be interesting to see where running backs go when August drafters start coming in. I think Zeke has the potential to go quite a bit higher. I think that's a fair point. He's already like sort of steadily just always rising. John says being able to start 3 receivers, then McBride in the 4th and Kyler in the 7th feels so good. I do really like that with the Arizona hype that I was sharing a little bit ago. This says, since targets are the lifeblood, where do you stand on James Cook and PPR? I think, probably on that not being the right interpretation of the point I was making, because I'm talking about targets being like, what did James Cook have last year? 54 targets is like, it's good, but the point I was trying to make with that whole conversation was like the outlier target numbers can be so impactful The lead running backs last year would have been up around 100, if not over 100. Usually they're over 100, but it wasn't last year. Okay, Breece Hall only had 95, but the fact that Breece Hall could get to 95, that Bijan Robinson can get to 86, that Christian McCaffrey's at 83 and has multiple seasons over 100 targets, 80 plus targets is like, okay, that's where I'd go nuts for it. James Cook was 19th in the NFL in running back targets, just behind Samaje Perine. I should have a phone line for people to call in. We'd never get any picks done. This asks about the yards per out run data sheet downloadable somewhere. I can't do that because it's PFF data. That one is, my lookups for PFF data. I can't sell or allow people to download data that I don't know. All right, I think I'm caught up. You guys had some comments about basically just go live whenever I want was sort of the take there. Jim said I was describing exactly how he feels about the Colts. As a result, he's ended up significantly underweight on everyone besides Downs, but it definitely scares him. That's sort of where I'm at. I don't feel great about it. There's a lot of sharp people that are in on it. It just at those prices feels like a mistake. Not like a huge mistake, to be clear. All right. Let's see. We got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20, 21. Oh my God, I still have like 30 drafts to do. All right. I was going to do the wheel spin. We're going to do a wheel spin. I got to do more of these team-based things. I want to get through all the wheel spins and all the teams. And like, I don't know, how many of these I'm going to be able to do in August. Still have 19 teams to get through that we haven't discussed. I'm going to try to do this quicker. Let's remember some guys. Let's talk through the team relatively quickly. And then we're going to get back to the drafts. But I might start doing 2 wheel spins per show sometimes. Baltimore Ravens is the wheel team today. Baltimore Ravens. I never know if the audio from that is cutting me off, but remember some guys. I mean, Jamal Lewis, right? Ed Reed, Ray Lewis. Yeah, it's more defenders, right? Tony Siragusa. You got some mean dudes on defense. Sam Adams. Offensively, I think of like Brandon Stokely. I think of Derek Mason, Anquan Bolden in those years. Michael Crabtree was there for a little bit. Obviously, the Joe Flacco era, but wasn't really ever a big fantasy quarterback, Flacco. It was the runners. It was Jamal Lewis. It was Ray Rice. I mean, it's not the best fantasy team, and obviously it hasn't been around forever, so we can't even go to like the 80s and stuff. The first year their lead passer was Vinny Testaverde. I knew this trivia question about Michael Jackson. You had Derek Alexander in their second year. Jermaine Lewis, kick returner. I think he had a kick return touchdown in the Super Bowl, if I'm not mistaken. They win the Super Bowl in their 5th year of existence. Cleveland Browns fans are super stoked about that. Tony Banks was a reasonable fantasy quarterback in this 99-2000 stretch. You have Elvis Gerbach, Jeff Blake. They actually threw under Brian Billick a little bit. These were some interesting teams. Banks led the team in passing the Super Bowl year, but obviously Trent Dilfer was a quarterback when they won the Super Bowl. It's fascinating that Dilfer wasn't even their leading passer that year. There's not a lot of dudes. You got Terry Allen in here. You got Eric Redd in here. Early career Priest Holmes before he went and became what he is. Willis McGahee in there for a year. LaRon McClain. That's a fun one. Justin Forsett. Terrence West, Alex Collins, Gus Edwards. Look at that. Lamar Jackson's been their lead rusher for 5 straight seasons. John Brown, Mike Wallace. Man, Kamar Aiken led this team in receiving 1 year. Torrey Smith, that's a good one. Oh, Todd Heap, that's a good one. There's not a lot of great, remember some guys here. Jim Harbaugh, it's you mean John Harbaugh, but yeah, that is crazy. Elvis Gerbeck. We got a Terrell Suggs, a lot of Todd Heap here. All right, let's go look at their 2023 season a little bit, talk about it. Lamar. I mean, one of the big things I want to talk about with the Ravens is Lamar's rushing. We don't talk enough about how different some of the different quarterbacks can be rushing wise. But Lamar in 2019, 2020, you're looking at 1,000-yard rushing seasons, which rarely happens. In the years since, you're looking at in 12 games over 760 yards twice, and then last year 821. Last year's where it really kind of started to fall a little bit, but it's still like that's a meaningful number. Now the TDs aren't super high, but keep in mind these numbers. Even as a rookie, 695, and he wasn't even starting he wasn't the starting quarterback for a lot of that. Just the ability to run for 800 yards is sort of the point here, not the 1,000 or anything. But this is a big number. Now, like if you go look at, we're going to go to Josh Allen. Josh Allen's TD numbers are meaningfully different, meaningfully better. And I'm not trying to knock Josh Allen at all, but his career high is 763 rushing yards. He's got multiple years more in the 500-yard range. And as he gets older, I would expect his numbers to kind of start to decline a little bit like we're seeing from Lamar. 15 rush TDs last year is massive, but most years he was more in the 7 to 9 range. His overall rushing value, I mean, it's pretty TD dependent relative to Lamar's. Lamar is such an elite. Let's do Jalen Hurts next. Lamar's such an elite runner of the football. Like he's like makes guys miss. Like he's a super talented runner. Jalen Hurts has a close to 800-yard season as a 23-year-old that started to decline in the years since, but he does have 3 straight years with double-digit rushing touchdowns. Obviously, the tush push is huge for him, but you see last year in 17 games, only 600 rush yards. I think he probably is going to settle in. Now, he had a knee injury last year, but maybe he's a 600 to 700-yard per or an overall yard guy. Again, the point I'm trying to establish is just that Lamar's rushing yardage scale a little bit higher than the other guys. Kyler's career high, 819 yards, had an 11 touchdown season. That second year hasn't played a full season since, but the next year in 14 games was only at 400 rush yards. In 11 games, only at 400. Wasn't really on pace to get into that 800-yard range again. Don't anticipate at age 27 that he would be like all rushing quarterbacks tend to do a little bit more of it in their first couple seasons, and then it starts to fall off a little. Let's go to like a Cam Newton where we can see the full career. You have 700 plus in the first couple years, and then you start to see it in the 500 to 600 range. You get another 700-yard season here in 2017. 600 yards with New England that year. Really, the rushing upside that year comes from the 12 TDs. He has a couple other 10-plus TD seasons. It's not easy to have 10 rushing TDs for a quarterback. That's why the Jalen Hurts thing is so impressive. He's done it 3 years in a row. Allen only did it once, right? But yeah, Lamar is a unique talent in that way. I think he's the best rushing quarterback of all time, I would argue. And I think that is a bigger floor of production than basically anyone else. Now, in addition to that, he does still throw for a lot. And last year, I'll point out, he had a career high. So he's never even thrown for 4,000 yards. But last year, he goes for 3,600. He had never thrown for more than 3,100 all the way back to his second season. That's a big number for a guy who also adds close to 1,000 rushing yards. The TD rate is a big element as well. He's always carried really high TD rates. He was a league leader at 9%, which is absurd. But even these 5+% numbers are really strong the last couple of years. And so he doesn't throw a ton, but he does end up throwing for TDs at a high clip or running for some of those TDs. He hasn't been the dynamic, like break fantasy player the last couple of years, I think it's still there. It's still possible. One of the big keys about this offense last year, we'll go back to this yards per out run database, is how it got a little more spread. They wanted to be more Louisville, right? They wanted to be more like Lamar's offense is at Louisville. They wanted to be more sort of wide receiver based. And what, like, I've talked about this before, but Mark Andrews, I have the alignment percentages over here, goes from the 60% up to 80+% slot rate. You see his inline rate is like a third of its peak in the high 20s. It's all the way down to like 9-10%. And at wide, it was a career low as well. Just basically living in the slot last year. And then you see how that affected his ADOT. So a lot of what he did inline was play action up the seam and was the vertical threat in the old Greg Roman offense. In this Todd Monken offense, he's basically just your traditional slot receiver. The ADOT drops 2 points, and then his targets per out run also fell, but his routes per game was up. He was on pace for over 500 routes. The one big thing about his 2021 season where he went off was the 623 routes. He has not had a monster route season otherwise. He's either gotten hurt or not been used that way, was the case early in the career. And that's where the targets per out run used to be really, really high. The efficiency used to be really, really good. He's very efficient again last year. But this ADOT thing is something that is a little bit worrisome to me, especially with this drop in targets per out run. The weighted targets per out run is at a career low, or not a career low, excuse me. His rookie season was a little bit lower, but meaningfully lower than each of his past 4 seasons. When he was running fewer routes, the efficiency stuff could be insane. Like the yards per out run here is just crazy. He had over 30% targets per out run as a sophomore. They put him on the field and they threw to him like with intent. When the routes got higher, the targets per out run fell a little bit. Makes sense, but he still had over 2 yards per out run. Last year, he held up really close to that 2 yards per out run. But again, I want to emphasize his 9.1 yards per target, which was actually higher than some of his years with a high ADOT. And why that happened and how that happened is he was very successful after the catch, but it's a small sample. And with the low ADOT, I always talk about depth adjusting the efficiency stuff. With the low ADOT, this looks like more of an outlier. And so I'll go over to the stat lookup. This is the stats that I use for projections. And I have that depth adjusted racer metric that I like to look at. So over here on the right, this is how much better than average or expected based on his ADOT, his yards per target was. And so some years he's meaningfully better. It's like it's anything at like 0.1 or higher is really good. So this year here and this year here are very strong. This year and this year, a little bit more, typical, like for a good player. Last year though, that jumped a ton, right? It was way, way better than what his ADOT would suggest his yards per target should be. The yards per target numbers are a little bit different here. But the point being, his ADOT being 2 yards lower than any other recent season suggests that his yards per target should have been on the low end of his range. Instead, it was closer to the high end. Now, that might mean that he's just that good from a yak perspective and some of those things. But I would argue that this is, especially because it was a smaller sample. Remember, we were just looking at his routes. There wasn't a ton of routes last year, 278. I would argue that that's a little bit of a concern. That it's a little bit of a concern that he can be that efficient again, even though he's always been efficient. It's a little bit of a concern that as his ADOT dropped, his targets per out run also dropped, and the weighted targets per out run fell. And then he was a little bit more efficiency dependent at a lower ADOT. Kind of concerning for me. That doesn't mean I'm out on Andrews. I'm still drafting him, etc. But people have talked about like Andrews is the same old dude, and he's being drafted lower than usual, and that's not fair. And I just fundamentally disagree with that. The way that I would describe this relative to Dalton Kincaid, who I've argued should go ahead of Andrews, is that even though Dalton Kincaid only is a 1.46 yards per out run guy, we don't even know if he's good. 7.5 yards per target, 19.6 targets per out run. That doesn't even contend with the best seasons or like the worst seasons of Andrews' career. And it's at a lower ADOT. This 0.44 weighted targets per out run isn't good. The reason I would argue for this is that the 2024, like we're predicting the future. The 2024 season sets up in a way for the Bills that this could be the Dalton Kincaid season. That is one of the range of outcome possibilities. While for Andrews, the way that I would discuss it is it feels to me like He's going to be very good. He's going to be a floor play. He's going to be a strong player because he is a strong player. But the Ravens offense is sort of going away from the tight end position. It's sort of going in a different direction in terms of what actually hits in a meaningful way. Isaiah Likely is another way of looking at this. After Andrews went out, Likely played a lot, and he was good because of efficiency. But look at these targets per out run numbers for him. As a rookie in Greg Roman's offense, when he ran 268 routes, he had a 21% targets per out run. Last year, basically couldn't earn volume. This is not a tight end offense anymore. Greg Roman's offense was a heavily tight end offense. This one is very wide receiver heavy. So you start to look at Zay Flowers as a rookie, 19.9% targets per out run. A lot of this was manufactured touches, a little concerned about his ability to earn volume, but they've also invested at the wide receiver position. They invested in it with Rashad Bateman, invested with Odell Beckham, invested with more draft picks this year, like Devontae Walker, who's a little bit of an intriguing prospect that, I won't go too deep into, but Sean Siegel's written him up as a guy that you should really look at as, a late round pick for sure. Rashad Bateman had this decent 120 route sample. I'll note that it was a small sample in the second season. The yards per out run's really strong. The targets per out run's really strong. Everything looks good, except for it's a really small sample. That's why some of us were on Bateman last year. We get a larger sample and everything goes bad again. The targets per out run's bad. The yards per target's bad. Yards per out run is a career low, similar to his rookie year, larger sample. So the two large samples are bad. The one medium sample or small sample is the only good play that we've gotten out of Bateman. And yet they're hyping him again. And I kind of am interested in him because he had a really good collegiate profile. I would typically be completely out on somebody whose profile looked only like that. But if we go to the collegiate document, you have these types of yards per out runs. You have targets per out run in all 3 years for Bateman of 27% plus, massive weighted targets per out run. This guy in college was an absolute alpha. Does that mean he's going to be that in the pros? I don't know. His final season, only 137 routes. Most of this was the first 2 years of his college career. Comes right in, steps foot on campus, and is like, I'm going to earn volume like an elite. Typically, that means good things in the NFL. It's surprising that we haven't seen that a little bit. Let's go over now to, apologize for all the typing on the mic. I'm sure that's a little bothersome. Oh yeah, Nelson Aguilar is the other guy. It's going to be a little bit rotational. You guys seem to like the spreadsheet. So let's go to projections. You guys are in on my projection sheet. Here's where I wound up. This is like the final projections for the team. Zay Flowers, 125 targets. Mark Andrews, I had at 112. And basically, I'm just saying, I think he's going to have a really good year, but I don't think that he's going to be the focal point of the pass game, the focal point of the offense. I don't feel like that's the direction they're going in. I feel like he's going to be the more traditional tight end in the sense of a better than, he's going to be good because he's good, but a more traditional tight end from an offensive focal point standpoint where it's we go to the tight end in certain situations, but we don't run our offense through the tight end anymore. They used to run their offense through the tight end, and that was awesome. But I don't think this version of the Todd Monken offense is built that way. Bateman, I only have at 77 targets. One of the big issues here is just the lack of overall volume. This is not a team that's going to throw a ton. You can look at this as some of their lookups. Their play rate, their pass rate, the pass rate over expected last year. The last few years, the pass rate's been very low. In 2021, it was high. Last year, the pass rate was low, but the pass rate over expected was closer to neutral. The wins were very high, right? They were in lower pass rate situations, but the win total's high again this year. The expected pass rate below league average again. I'm predicting it to be right around expectation again. So the pass rate over expected here would be negative 0.005. I predicted a 0.58 pass rate compared to the win total expected pass rate of 58.5%. I'm predicting a 58%. You look back at 2022, their pass rate over expected was 5 percentage points below expected. Last year, it was basically neutral. I'm projecting a half of a percentage point below for this year. And I'm projecting the play volume to actually go up from the last couple of years because they're good and they have a high expected win rate. And I should We should expect, more plays than average typically in that type of offense. But Lamar is going to have a high scramble rate. He's going to have a high rate of design runs. Those are going to keep the clock moving, right? I am projecting Derrick Henry for 4.6 yards per carry, solid efficiency. You'll see a yards per carry. These are high yards per carry projections for me across the board. Keaton Mitchell, super efficient last year. I have him actually at 5. And I think when he comes back late in the year, he's going to factor in. I think Justice Hill's the backup early. I don't think Rasheen Ali is really a guy, or at least that's the way that I'm projecting it. If I miss on one guy in these projections, it's probably Devontae Walker, who can outproduce. Isaiah Likely to me is no longer a play. Like, this offense is no longer tight end focused. He was purely efficiency last year. I mean, he did hit, but you're playing it as a handcuff. The old system used to play both tight ends a little bit, and so it was a handcuff, but also maybe you're getting Likely on the field more. I just showed how they're like purely slot receivers now. Like, in this offense, it's Zay Flowers, it's Rashad Bateman. They're going to get Devontae Walker and Nelson Agholor out there. It's 3 receiver sets. Likely's not even getting on the field unless Andrews is hurt. And if Andrews is hurt, Likely wasn't even as good last year as he was as a rookie at earning volume, because this offense is not built around the tight end as much anymore. It's more built around these wide receivers. The Derrick Henry thing is then the final conversation point. I'm going to go back to the stat lookup thing. He was really good last year, or still okay. This far right column, missed tackles forced per touch and yards after contact per attempt. He was still like at his normal rate, which is actually not super, super high for missed tackles forced per touch, but he wasn't any lower. For a guy who's, rush yards per carry had kind of fallen off a little bit last year. His peak, he was 5+ yards per carry. Missed tackles forced per touch, still very strong. Yards after contact per attempt, still within the realm. Not quite as high as some of his peak years, but still within the realm of decent years. The yards per carry was more of an issue of the Titans offense. Rush TD percentages, though, have always been massive. These are really, really high numbers. Over 4% of his rushes every year, basically, except for 2022, where he's at 3.7%. When I go to the projections, the average is like 2.8%. So I'm projecting him to be at 4.2% again. That's a lot of rush TDs for a guy that's on decent volume. I'm projecting him for 11.2 rush TDs. It's probably close to my highest number of rush TDs in the NFL. He still doesn't come out like as a top running back necessarily. See, the rush TDs they actually are the highest. But you got to tell yourself he's going to catch more passes than I'm projecting, or that he's going to get like 300+ carries. I got him at 267. I think that's a good amount for an offense that has a lot of quarterback rushing. Half PPR, this is probably going to be, it's definitely going to be better. I have it sorted by PPR. Probably going to look better, but like he's still behind ETN in this. He's ahead of HN, who's going to look bad in projections because of, split workload and the contingency upside that's clearly baked in on him and Mostert's costs, because people are drafting Mostert as if he's going to get hurt, obviously. Otherwise, he'd be the best pick in fantasy in the 8th round. 20+ TD score going in the 8th round is just insane. But yeah, Henry to me, not like a smash pick. People are talking about the TDs. Even if you give him the TDs, now maybe he scores more than this, right? Like that's, I think the upside is like, okay, well, what if he scores 18 touchdowns? Gus Edwards scored 13 last year. And that's possible. I got him at 11 with a high TD rate. As far as his efficiency, though, I did push it back up to 4.6 yards per carry. I wanted to note he hasn't been that high in multiple years. I would almost never a 30+ year old running back that has shown yards per carry decline, push them back up to an efficient range. But the reason I'm doing that here is because of Lamar Jackson. And I saw somebody say that like Henry's going to open up holes for Jackson. I think that's an interesting perspective. I would look at it the opposite way, that Jackson opens up holes for Henry. Regardless, Jackson's a dynamic runner. I got his yards per carry at 6, which I don't do for most quarterbacks. I won't project them that high. And the fact that he's always a threat to pull the ball and go around the edge means that Henry's going to have holes up the middle for sure. The edge defenders can't crash down the line and start to close up some of those interior holes. That's going to allow Henry to run downhill. That's going to be effective for him because he's a big locomotive that needs to be running downhill. It's the perfect fit for Derrick Henry. And if somebody's going to continue to be productive at age 30 and beyond, like somebody who's physical outlier like him, makes perfect sense. So definitely in on the possibility that Derrick Henry has a really strong rushing season, scores a lot of rushing TDs. I still think because of the lack of receiving for basically everyone in the Baltimore offense and the little bit of rotation that they've done there before, I do think they probably give Henry a lot of work, but I'm projecting a bigger gap here, a bigger concentration to the running back rush attempts than we've ever seen with Baltimore running backs with a Harbaugh like era. Like they maybe since like the early years when he had Ray Rice, but I'm projecting Derrick Henry to really dominate the running back rushes, but you're talking about Lamar Jackson having 150 rushes probably. I'm actually projecting him for over 900 rush yards if he stays healthy the whole year. That's maybe hot relative to what we just looked at, where last year he only had about 800. Let's bump this down in real time a little bit because I think that's aggressive. Maybe he doesn't get 158 rushes either. Maybe the design rate needs to come down a touch, which now means that my rush attempts number here is too low, which means I got to let's give Derrick Henry half a percentage point of rush attempts. So you just saw in real time, I just bumped up Derrick Henry's projection and bumped down Lamar's rushing a little. So it's, 898, still pretty hot. I don't want to change it too much because these are all rate numbers. And I think the fact that Lamar only had 800-ish rush yards last year might be the outlier, basically. And I think he only played 16 games. I'm projecting 17. Yeah, he only played 16 games. I'm projecting 17 games for everyone. He had 821 yards in 16 games. What is that? Yards per game? 51 per game. So you add 51 yards to that, he's at 872. Close to what I projected him for in 2024, which was down. That was a career low rush yards per game by a meaningful amount. It's a different offense now, but used to be at 63 plus yards per game. So not career low. I keep saying career low and forgetting the rookie year, but since he was the clear starter. Anyway, that is sort of the way that I would look at the Ravens. As I mentioned, I think Justice Hill's probably the backup in the early part of the year. I think Keaton Mitchell is an interesting. I like him as a bring back on Houston stuff when I didn't get a Baltimore player, because I think he's the perfect example of a bring back. He's a guy you want late season to be on the field in week 17. The only way, he's started on PUP or whatever. I don't think he's going to play early in the year, but he was very explosive as a rookie. We can actually look at his, his rookie year production. These are the rushers. Like Gus Edwards was down to a 4.1 yards per carry. Justice Hill, 4.6 was good. Keaton Mitchell, only 47 rush attempts, but look at this number. 8.4 yards per attempt last year. Like that's how high the efficiency guys can get when you're talking about what Lamar Jackson threatens in the run game. And then he was really effective as a receiver as well. Only had 11 targets, but caught 9 of them for 93 yards. That's a 8.5 yards per target. The average for a running back is typically 6. They wanted to get the ball in his hands. He was explosive, and then he got hurt. I think when he comes back late in the year, he's the lightning to Derrick Henry's thunder. It could be a decent late season guy, and like I said, be a bring back option. The other thing is you're playing him as a handcuff to Henry in most cases. Like he would be the highest ceiling play if Henry were to go down. And so the fact that he's missing the early part of the year, like that's kind of the way that we're projecting handcuffs as well. Like we don't expect handcuffs to be on the field in massive ways early in the year. So yeah, I think that is a fine play at the end of best ball contests where you're thinking, the fact that he's still rehabbing, he's a pure handcuff. Like when you draft like Clyde Edwards-Helaire late or Tank Bigsby late or something, and you're like, these guys are the pure handcuffs. Like you're not really expecting them to have usable weeks until there's an injury to the starter. That's sort of the idea. So, that's what we'll say for the Ravens. They're definitely a fun team. I got to start making picks, a lot of picks. We're going to jump into the slow puppy. It's already in the 6th round. Again, the slow puppies, I'm letting myself be a little bit less. Sorry, I just cleared my throat, and I usually move the mic away from my mouth when I do it, and for some reason I move the mic towards my mouth to do it. Typically, I'm getting more receivers than this, but I'm trying some different stuff in the slow puppies. Jamar Chase, Devon Achane, Stefon Diggs, Christian Kirk, Trey McBride was the first 5 picks. So I did, and I don't even really love taking Kirk there, but I felt like I had to get a receiver there, and I passed tight end around the corner, and then McBride came around the corner. I think this was me going, I've gotten so much McBride that like I'll just pass him here, and he comes back to 504. I'm like, all right, I'm going to take McBride, because usually I just take McBride in the 4th, and then I like the 5th round receivers just as well as this late round 4 group. So maybe it's Keenan Allen, maybe it's Jaden Reed, whatever. I went with Kirk in this one, and then I went with McBride. So we're back in the back end of the 6th. I have a 1-3-1, 1 running back, 1 tight end, 3 receivers. And Deontay Johnson's there. The other, top receivers, Christian Watson, Brian Thomas, Jordan Addison, to me are just not the same play as Deontay Johnson. I'm going to, in a situation where I'm light on receivers and trying to add receivers, I'm going to take Deontay Johnson there every time. And I'm okay being overweight players that I'm really in on. You guys know that. I think it just makes a ton of sense that if you're really that high on a guy's target earning and all that stuff, that you would want him in every build in the 6th or 7th round. This is an eliminator where I took Lamar Jackson. It's a Nico team. I'm kind of Amon-Ra, Nico, Debo start. Getting Debo in the 3rd is awesome. Lamar obviously correlates with Nico, but they also share a week 14 bye. It's, in the eliminator, it's hard to get to that final. I take Pitts in the early 5th. Not going to lie, guys. Not sure why I took Lamar in this. I do kind of like the elite quarterbacks in the eliminator a little. Like, talk through that a little, but this is not a good draft. I'm gonna throw another share of Deontay Johnson in, though, and keep it moving, because that week 11 bye fits this build, and we just need more receivers in the eliminator when we started with an early QB for some reason. All right, we're through all the ones that are only 1 hour. Let's jump into a BBM here. This one, I just took a second running back, Aaron Jones, at the 7-8 turn. So one of the big things with BBMs and all these drafts is the late picks are so tricky when you take an early running back. So I took a Puka Gibbs start here, and then I go Zay Higgins 3-4. I don't take the tight end that I want to take. I get Pitts at the 5-6 with Hollywood Brown, but now I only have the 4 receivers, and it gets back to me in late 7, and there's no one left. Jamison Williams and Keon Coleman are already off the board. I'd love to get that 5th receiver. I'm not going to be able to. It's such a different game from the early picks, where even if you take McCaffrey, you just get an extra pick, because the early 7th round, you can still take Brian Thomas. You can still take Deontay or Ladd or JSN in a lot of these drafts is still going in the early 7th, or Addison now that he's sliding, or whatever, so you get an extra detour. So not only do you get Christian McCaffrey, which is a way better thing in the 1st round than the late round draft slots. You get one of these elite players, or you get Lamb, or you get Tyreek, or you get Jamar Chase, but you also get an extra round to figure out your detours and everything, which is the early part of round 7 becoming so much more viable for a wide receiver play than the late part of round 7. If you're in the late rounds, like, one of the tricky things is not only are you starting without a top 5 overall player, you also have only basically 6 rounds to figure out your receiver position. And often it probably makes sense to be taking 5 receivers in those 6 rounds. And I didn't do that here. And so then I wind up taking Aaron Jones at the very end of the 7th as a guy who had slid a little bit. I starred Jonathan Brooks. I'm going to add him. I'm going to go running back here, because it's sort of like, draft doesn't care what your needs are kind of a thing. I'm not going to go chase Curtis Samuel at this point when I can start to build a really strong running back room, and I might as well. So I have Gibbs, Aaron Jones, Jonathan Brooks. I liked Aaron Jones and Jonathan Brooks together. So I took Jones there and then starred Brooks and was like, okay, Jones will help me get off to a hot start. Brooks a little bit more of a late round guy. I love this. I badly want to see a good run game designer put Lamar, Henry, and Keaton all in the backfield and wish the defense luck. I do really love that. By the way, for those of you guys hanging out, go like, subscribe, all that good stuff for the video. Appreciate all the support. There's an eliminator here. Garrett Wilson, Jahmyr Gibbs, Zay Flowers, T. Higgins, Chris Godwin, George Kittle. So I took the early Gibbs and I took the Kittle at the 5-6. It's the same deal that I just talked about. If you take Gibbs at the 202, and then you still want to get an elite tight end with the eliminator, I mean, I think I was considering not going elite tight end, but with the eliminator, Kittle with the week 9 bye is also just like, it doesn't overlap with anything else. It's really nice. I could take Keon Coleman here. He does fall away to the end of the 7th in this one, but I have 2 week 12 buys already in my build. That's one of the tricky things with, stacking too many buys, is that you kind of have to miss picks you want to take sometimes. I think Keon Coleman's certainly worth taking here. And while I understand why he slid a little bit around his, the questions around his profile, like, he's a better play than these other guys that are on the board. He's in a different tier. And to get him at 83 here would add something. And then the eliminator, just getting to week 12 does. I don't think there's really any other pick I have to make here. I mean, the other pick would be Kyler, but I don't have it stacked or anything. I'm going to take Keon because I think I need another receiver, and I think that's a unique opportunity to get the 5th receiver. It does stack up my week 12 buys too much. It does likely mean that week 12 is going to be hell if I can get there. But we've talked about in the eliminator, it's hard to get to week 12, period. So first things first, I want to build a good receiving room. And then, Zay and Chris Godwin are going to have to go off that week, and whatever other receivers I draft are going to have a spike game. Do we name Ravens like Dennis Pitta? That's a good one. I don't think we named Dennis Pitta. All right, what else do we got? Man, there's so many drafts still to get through. I talked about stuff that no one cares about for too long. Big time Stefon Diggs conversation today. The sprint. Let's jump into a sprint. I don't know if we've talked about any of my sprints yet. Started this one, Bijan at pick 6. Decided in the sprint I wanted to get some Bijan exposure. I think the 3-week element does, you talk about like the floor of volume that I think the upside is for Bijan's season. I'm thinking of the prime Todd Gurley seasons when he was the guy you had to have in the major tournaments where there was a sprint element, 3 straight weeks of scoring, and he scores like 6 touchdowns. And he's a 20-plus touch guy that puts up 100 total yards every game, catches some passes, and scores a lot of TDs. I don't pick Todd Gurley's name lightly. Obviously, it's because it's the Sean McVay system, and the Rams have a heavy influence on what I expect the Falcons to look like this year, as we've talked about a ton, with Zach Robinson coming over, Raheem Morris also coming over. So I take Bijan here, and then I go Waddle, Diggs, 2 guys who, again, in a sprint element, I want big volume. This gets back to those target conversations, and especially for Waddle, if Tyreek Hill were to miss, I think could be massive contingent value, but still, even without Tyreek Hill missing, can have a 3-week stretch where he just gets a ton of volume. We've talked about how Miami concentrates volume like no other offense. Diggs, similar deal. I've talked through this in the 3rd round where you can get him at pick 30 like I took here. I think he's a guy who can really rack up volume in an exciting pass game, with efficiency in a way that's probably, a half tier higher than the other players that go in that range, like Tank and Zay Flowers, who I do like. So I get back on the clock here in the 4th, and I don't have access to that T. Higgins tier of receiver. Tank and Zay Flowers are long gone. And because I started Bijan, I would really like to take a 3rd receiver here, but it's Amari Cooper, Christian Kirk, and that's tricky. Amari Cooper does have the week 17 with Waddle. This is a sprint, so the week 17 isn't like, all 3 weeks matter is what it comes down to. The week 17 is not nothing. Cooper also has KC in week 15, and I wind up with KC in a decent number of builds. I could go Kincaid. I could go Andrews, who has the week 17. There's not a double correlation with Andrews. There's not a double correlation with Kincaid. There's not with Christian Kirk. There's no correlation with Kirk. I could see taking Kirk as well. George Pickens going meaningfully lower in this format. That's interesting. I'm not really in on him, but it is interesting. The ADPs are a little different. You see him in the BBMs rise to like pick 40. That's not happening here. I think you can. I don't want to go Lamar or Mahomes in this scenario, but you can talk about elite tight ends being more valuable in the sprint. Largely, I don't want to do that because I've already made the detour for Bijan, and I'm probably wanting to still take an elite tight end. That's where it gets tricky is, I mean, from this draft slot, my 7th round pick comes at 7-6 at 78. You know, we get into that group. We look ahead. Like JSN's going 77 in this format. Hopefully he gets there. Keon Coleman's going 79. Maybe I'm taking Keon Coleman as my wide receiver 5. I'd really like to take my wide receiver 5 in the 7th round, even if I take a tight end. I don't think we'll get Deontay Johnson falling that far, but he's a low ADP in this format. Maybe it's Jordan Addison. Maybe he slides, and I decide to take him for the late season sprint upside as that wide receiver 5. So here, I mean, I could take the tight end detour here, which would basically lock me into wide receiver picks the next several rounds. At 54, I don't know that the wide receiver picks are that meaningfully different than what I'm here, looking at with Amari Cooper. In this format, it's showing that Keenan Allen would actually be a slight reach there. He's 54.4 ADP. I think he goes before that pick. Jaden Reed, another option at that pick. I probably can't put off tight end to pick 67 in the 6th round because, I mean, Kittle's actually going a lot higher in this format. 62. It's right about Kittle's typical ADP is 67. So it's probably the mid-5th that I have to take a tight end. It's probably taking Pitts at 5-6, which I'm very content with. Or I could take Kincaid here, set up that mid-5th wide receiver. The next 2 picks are almost certainly wide receiver, tight end. I don't mind the Amari pick here with the Waddle thing, and then also, opening up a KC pick in the 6th. If I wind up taking either Xavier Worthy or Rashee Rice in the 6th, then you have Cooper stacked 2 different ways. Might even wind up with a Cincinnati running back in this build, like a Chase Brown. You could have Cooper stacked all 3 ways. Cleveland's got that nice little schedule. But I think probably, and this is the thing I run into a lot, I just wind up taking the tight end here. So I'm not getting as much Pitts as I want, is really what it comes down to, because I'm not playing the ADP game with tight end. I'm just taking Kincaid. More frequently, I'm taking McBride. Kelsey went 1 pick ahead of me in this one. If Kelsey would have fallen to 43, this wouldn't really have even been a long decision. I would have taken Kelsey really quickly. To me, he's kind of in another tier. But I think it's Kincaid and leave open the option of like Keenan Allen falling to me and really liking adding Keenan Allen to this build. Kincaid's a guy that can really stack volume over 3 weeks in that pass game. Talked about this being the potential kind of like year for him to break out. If Kincaid is good, if he's worth the 1st round pick, if he's a long-term tight end that is successful, we're talking about this being the year that breakout happens, right? And so you have to like zoom out 5 years in the future and then look back and then say, well, how did his career progress? I mean, maybe he just sucks, whatever. Like I'm not afraid of misses. Like, I'll tell you that. When am I going to live stream from the bridge/deli in Oregon? That would be a lot of fun if I could get the tech side set up. All right. Tuck Kincaid. I'm going to go star just every receiver except Calvin Ridley. That sprint needs wide receivers. All right, here's a slow puppy. I've started 2 tight ends here. I was hoping to get Pitts in the late 5th in this one. So I went Lamar in this one. I went Zay and then overdrafted Lamar to intentionally build a Zay Lamar stack. I'm trying to do a little bit more with the elite QBs in this run of drafts because I had almost none. We did the look at my exposures recently, and I had almost no exposure to Josh Allen or Jalen Hurts or Lamar Jackson builds. I still think that's probably not the way that I want to be building like for most of my profile. I want to be building later round QBs regardless. And so that's part of plays into the Anthony Richardson conversations and stuff. But I do want to have some builds to these guys that can be so dynamic. We just talked about how Lamar could run for 1,000 yards, right? It wouldn't be that surprising when you look at the way that his rushing actually plays out. And so in this draft, I decided to go Garrett Wilson. I went Nico Collins early second. So then when Zay Flowers was there late third, I took him. And I decided to go, okay, well, I already have Nico and Zay built out. I'll take Lamar early fourth. This is a puppy. I still want an elite tight end. So I told myself, okay, if Pitts makes it to 5'10", take him also. The best receiver right now is Calvin Ridley, who I don't draft. I'm going to take Pitts. It's not going to be Ridley, but on the way back, I do need a wide receiver 4. Because again, from these late draft slots, you take 2 detours like this, you're not going to get a wide receiver 5 in the 7th. So I definitely need a wide receiver 4 in the 6th. So starring some names. This is really, I mean, Deontay Johnson's probably a guy I could pull up and make the wide receiver 4 in this build. Like the way that that's coming together. All right, here's another sprint. Let's go check this out. Again, a late draft slot. And I decided to go Josh Allen, Travis Kelce at the 3-4 turn. And then the guy at the 4-5 turn went Dalton Kincaid, Patrick Mahomes. So we both have each other's tight ends stacked up. I mean, I really do think Kelce's a different tier than Kincaid. I just said that. But I'm trying to think through if I was going to take Allen in this build, why I wouldn't just do it with Kincaid. It doesn't make a lot of sense. I went Wilson, London. A lot of receivers had gone off. T. Higgins was there, but not much else. And how Rashee Rice is already gone. You get so screwed. This is a sprint, $50 sprint, and you get really in a tough spot. I have to go receiver here. And look at Pitts made it back. I'd love to just take Pitts here. I think Garrett Wilson and Drake London can both be some pretty big studs. The question is, like, do I do this? Do I add a vet or do I just go, and for the people listening, it's Deontay Johnson again, or do I go listening to the audio? I think Adunze Worthy is probably the play. I guess I can go Godwin. I could go Godwin, Deontay, and get a Week 17 thing, but this is the sprint. I don't have to get a Week 17 thing. Why do I have Josh Allen on this team? I guess I'm hoping Keon Coleman comes all the way back to. If Keon Coleman makes it back to 84, that would redeem this build. Well, I mean, if he doesn't, I guess this is I gotta consider Curtis Samuel there then. So I have a lot of drafts going, and I've been behind at times in the last few days, including on Sunday where I was at a barbecue with my wife's family. They do like birthday celebrations every like month or so, and it was partly my birthday celebration. I got a little drunk, and then I got home and I had to get. I'm thinking that I made this Allen Kelce combination pick while kind of drunk right before bed on Sunday night, or perhaps on. I don't know that I've been drunk since, but I'm trying to excuse myself for backing myself into a hole here. I'm going to take Worthy. I'm going to take. And now I have Worthy and Kelce with Josh Allen. It's great. I'm going to take. I don't think Worthy and Adunze makes a lot of sense together. I guess I'm going to take Chris Godwin on this build. I mean, and then whatever. All right, we're just going to move on. Too many drafts to cry over spilt milk. BBM 5, 8-9 turn. This is one is further along. It's one where I did the Lamar Andrews at the 4-5. I started Christian McCaffrey, Debo, Davante, Lamar Andrews. I did DeAndre Hopkins and Deontay Johnson at the 6-7. I got 2 Niners. And so Brock Purdy would be, in play, not here, but at some point. I have Andrews and Brock Bowers as a fit. I only have 4 receivers, and I'm kind of I already have Lamar. The value's at QB, but I'm not going to be taking, Kyler on this build. Um, I guess the other consideration is running back, but there's not even really running back value. Mostert and Moss went in the 3 picks ahead of me. James Conner, DeAndre Swift. One of those guys makes it back. I'm more intrigued. I don't really love – I could pull up Tyjae Spears. I don't love taking Pollard or Brian Robinson this year. Trey Benson has really fallen. Look at that. I mean, I think that was necessary, but I'm surprised how quickly it happened. Javonte Williams at the 8-9 turn as an RB2 on a team that already has McCaffrey. I mean, I don't need to push RB2. I can go RB at the next turn. So to set that up, I'm going to take Bowers and be done at tight end. That's where there's value at this point. I could go running back, but I think I'm just going to do the Curtis Samuel pick, which I'm doing less of, but I'm not entirely out on. Gives me a wide receiver 5. It's behind ADP if I'm going to do it. Get a little ADP value. And now it sets me up to potentially go running back, or maybe take Purdy at the next turn. I don't mind when I do a McCaffrey build being pretty weak at RB2. So I want to be strong at receiver and tight end. Receiver's not going to be strong, but tight end should be strong. I mean, I think Andrews is going to be a good stable piece. I'm still taking him. We talked through some of the concerns, but still taking him. And then Bowers is kind of a spike week type. What's up, Dom? Glad to see you hanging out. We have too many drafts remaining. I'm kind of tired already. And look at this. Good Lord. All right. Best Ball Mania 5 build. I'm going to go. Look, I'm going to leave. This is going to be great streaming. And I'm going to post this audio on unadulterated. And like half the people might leave right now. I'm going to go pour myself a glass of iced coffee so I can wake up for the next half an hour of drafting that I still need to do. So I'll be gone for the next, minute or two. And there's just going to be nothing on the screen. So, yeah, this is Podcasting 101. Chair stream. Peak entertainment. Peak entertainment. Chair stream, my favorite. Glad you guys enjoyed that. I got my iced coffee. I'm normally a black coffee guy, but with iced, I like to pour a little of my wife's creamer into it. All right. The mid-fifth on Underdog makes Dom want to get another cup of coffee as well. He gets me. All right. This build, I went Bijan, Jalen Waddle, Malik Neighbors, T. Higgins. Well, we get Keenan Allen in this one. I think that's a fairly easy pick. Keenan Allen, Jaden Reed. This is a good example. Like some of the other ones, I'm like, I don't know which position I want to go to. I don't know where I want to go. If I start with a running back, and especially, I mean, I guess, the one thing, I was just going to say that this is easy. The one thing I do want to consider is, do I want to take a Pitts team here? Because I don't get enough Pitts. I don't often not have a tight end by the 5th, which I know seems bizarre because I'm taking them in the 4th almost every time, basically. These middle slots are the ones where I don't always take them in the 4th, especially when I get T. Higgins, but then I'm very likely to take him in the 5th. But man, Keenan or Reed, because I started with Bijan, I've already made one detour. Keenan or Reed is a really important 4th receiver pick there. Having said that, because I started with Bijan, I already have a little bit of a bet on the Atlanta offense. And a lot of my case on Bijan is offense related. It is volume, concentration of snaps. It's that things look like the Rams. And if I'm right about that on Bijan, I think it's a meaningful bet boost to the Kyle Pitts projection. Man, that hit of coffee woke me up. This is a great quote. Hey, you're blocking the chair. I came back. The chat is mad that they can't see the chair anymore. The Keenan Allen and Jaden Reed picks here are good ones. But I just talked myself into the Kyle Pitts pick being the great one. And I'm going to go wide receiver in the middle of the 6th, whoever that is. Probably Deontay Johnson again for the 15th time. The Atlanta bet is live. Bijan, Kyle Pitts correlation. You heard it here first. The Eliminator. Let's jump into this one, see what we got. 5 receivers and a tight end. That's how I like my eliminators to look. Started Amon-Ra, Brandon Ayuk. Ayuk is one I'm doing in the Eliminator. Less because of his individual profile, more because of that week 9 bye. That's really nice. Stefon Diggs, T. Higgins. I go Kincaid in the late 5th. It's nice that he slides to 55 there because I do still like to get an elite tight end in this format. Deontay, perfect eliminator pick in the 6th round. That combination of stability plus upside that I talk about in the eliminator, and the bye week fits as well. So I have a rainbow of bye weeks here. I have Amon-Ra on the week 5, Ayuk 9, Deontay 11, T is 12, and Diggs is 14. Kincaid matches T's 12 as my one tight end here. Man, and then Jordan Addison's there, but in the eliminator, I can understand why he's sliding in the eliminator, obviously, but to get a week 6 bye into this, and I think I could probably carry him for a little bit if it's just a short suspension with this 5 receivers. I really want the redundancy in the eliminator at receiver. I've written about this. I've talked about it. The 0 RB builds, I want them to be very 0 RBE. The alternative to Addison is like some running backs that I don't think I need for this build. Alvin Kamara, Aaron Jones, Ramondre Stevenson. I could take Brock Bowers well ahead of ADP to get my second tight end, but I don't think I have to. I can maybe try to play that next round if he comes back. If he doesn't, I don't think it's the end of the world if I have to move to Njoku or Goddard or something for the eliminator. I do like to do the 2 tight end builds. This is a tricky pick because he probably slides even more than this, but I am going to take Addison at what is probably above where his new ADP might settle. Although I'm curious because, how far can you really fall when there's this big gap here? There's this big gap in ADP. Keon Coleman's still there as well. And I could have taken him, but Jamison Williams then has a pretty big, substantial ADP drop, and then Curtis Samuel and everything. Like the market is telling you this is where we think the wide receiver window closes. I wonder if Addison can actually fall to the other side of that, or if his profile is strong enough that even with an expected suspension, he'll just fall to like Keon Coleman at 79.5. Which is where I just took him at 79. So I'm curious to see where he lands. I maybe just reached a little bit for a guy who's in some turmoil right now, but and in a format where a suspension isn't great. If Rice wasn't suspended this season, how high would I take him? Prior to the Worthy draft pick, I argued that Rice's profile was worthy of a 1-2 turn pick. I think he's a 2nd round pick. I'm not saying I would necessarily take him there, but I'm reading Benny's comments. Pour by the mic, steal the bit. That's Pete's. Pete likes to pour his coffee by the mic. It's pretty funny. Good idea. Yeah, I mean, the answer is that I don't know that there's going to wind up being a price on Rice that I wouldn't be in on. It sort of feels like wherever he winds up, I'm going to be taking some of him because I just see a lot more in that profile than I think most people do. All right. What was this? Was this a BBM? I started with 2 early running backs. I think I decided to just do it once. It's a BBM where I went Bijan, Jonathan Taylor. Just to see how it feels. I really had to. So I took Malik Neighbors at a discount in the 3rd round. And I was like, I mean, look, he's a good value. I took him over Diggs, but I probably should have just taken Diggs because I've, at this point, again, the routes type stuff, everything I talked about with the veterans earlier in the show, the way that they score, it matters so much more. Neighbors' hit is a little bit of different shape. It looks different when it does actually happen. It's more efficiency based. It's less consistent. It's hard as a wide receiver 1. And so I take him there, and then I have to take a receiver in the 4th. Higgins goes 1 pick ahead of me, so I just take Amari, who's like the boring vet that will run routes and hopefully can be good. I got to do that again here. Terry McLaurin makes sense in that mold, but Jaden Reed's just more fun in the same mold. So McLaurin does have the week 17 with Bijan. I don't take enough McLaurin. I'll take him. It keeps Jaden Daniels open as well. And it doesn't match Amari Cooper's bye, which Jaden Reed matched Amari Cooper's bye. So tough to just like bypass Jaden Reed for Terry McLaurin in my mind, but the contextual factors make it fine. I'm getting him after ADP there, and he's a good fit for this build. And then, like I said, I can make Jaden Daniels a priority now in this build, which I like to do. This team still needs a lot of receivers, and it probably can't take a tight end in the elite group. It's probably got to be a late round tight end build, which I think I was sort of forcing myself to do some of. I take so much of the early tight ends that. All right, BBM here. Where was I on this one? 111. I started Garrett Wilson, Drake London. They have the same buy. It kind of annoys me, but I mean, I still really like those 2 profiles together. I go Diggs, Laporta at the 3-4. Laporta falls into the early 4th. Jaden Reed, late 5. Again, this is a more like a better example of what I want to do out of the 10, 11, 12 spots. I talked about this, like you want to get 5 receivers in the first 6 rounds because you can't bank on anything in the late 7th. And so I took my 1 tight end. I didn't take any receivers. It's very 0 RB. It's Wilson, London, Diggs, Jaden Reed. That looks really nice through 5 rounds with Laporta. Early 6th, I can now hit. Man, I would love to take Kyle Pitts in the early 6th. I'd love to take James Cook. And I know people talk about, like, what about James Cook's profile? I like James Cook's profile. You take him here, you don't have enough receiver firepower, in my opinion. Again, talked through that a lot in the upcoming episodes of Stealing Bananas in the next week, why that is. It's because of it's relative to the teams that are going to get later running back points, and I feel highly confident that there's going to be later running back points, that James Cook's particular type of scoring will be replaceable later. Not by one player, but by a group of players. And I don't know how exactly to build that running back room, but some teams will hit on it because there will be enough productive running backs late because of how cheap running backs are. So again, that's like the shorthand way I would describe it. This pick is almost certainly a KC player. I like a Dunze too, but the question is, I mean, I take a lot of both of these guys, man. I like Rice. The reason I kind of like Worthy on this team is I have 4 really stable target earners, and so Worthy feels like the bigger swing. Like Rice's profiles maybe a little bit capped, although I think Rice is a big swing too, man. I think Rice could take a step forward in year 2. But Worthy could, I mean, they traded up to draft this guy in the 1st round. Worthy could be like the new Deshaun Jackson, the new Tyreek Hill, the new whatever. Like he could be the monster player. And I understand people are like, he's too skinny, he's this and he's that. Like, I just hope you're not wrong on that evaluation of Xavier Worthy, because I look at it. He earned a lot of volume in college. He just ran the fastest 40 time of all time. He goes into an offense that's led in pass rate over expected 5 straight years and has a very efficient quarterback. Volume's going to be there. Efficiency is going to be there. Everyone's really certain that he's not going to play. And my question is just like, what if you're wrong? What if he does play? What if Rashee Rice's suspension accelerates Xavier Worthy's time, his clock? Probably a lot of my Xavier Worthy bags are going to be hurting in the first few months of the year. Probably he won't play a ton. Probably they'll slow play it like I talked about earlier on the stream. I think they did with Rice. They definitely did with Sky Moore and some other guys, but those guys weren't as good, man. Or arguably weren't as good at profiles as Worthy, and I don't think they weren't drafted as high. I don't think the team thought they were as good. All right, here's another BBM where I started Bijan. I went Nico, Diggs, Jaden Reed, and then Kelsey, Nico, Diggs, then Kelsey fell to me in the 4th, and then Jaden Reed came back in the 5th. I mean, again, when Kelsey starts to fall into the 40s, it's just hard not to click that. Even though I had Bijan, I do like to get an elite tight end. Again, all my builds seem to have a tight end in the 4th, and then I don't get enough pits as a result. I take Reed in the 5th here. This looks like a lot of the other builds you guys have seen. I do have both Nico and Diggs here, which makes CJ Stroud kind of a priority, and he's available here. I do wonder, Tank's on this side of me, and Stroud sometimes really slides. I wonder if he would slide all the way to 79 in this room. 2 guys on that side have taken a QB so far. There's no Texans over there. I guess somebody could. Oh, Mixon's over here too. I was going to say somebody could go Stroud Mixon, but Mixon's over on the right side of the board too. I think I'm going to try to pass Stroud, even though I think if you take both Nico and Diggs at these costs, you probably need Stroud. But this team needs a 4th receiver that it might not be able to get in the 7th round. And Xavier Worthy's sitting there. Hell, Deontay Johnson's sitting there. By the time I'm back up in the 7th, if I go Stroud here, I've already taken Bijan and Kelsey. There's a real concern that even Keon Coleman's gone, and then it's Jamison Williams as my wide receiver 4. Maybe that's the way you got to play it instead of trying to pass Stroud. See, this is what I'm seeing too. Trevor says, I'm consistently seeing Stroud slide to around 80. It wouldn't be that surprising if he came to 79, but it is kind of asking a lot where I took these guys in the 2nd and 3rd round. I guess I'm ahead of ADP to take him here. He was 3rd in the queue, so I thought he was behind ADP, but all right, I'm going to try to pass him. Now the question is, do I like Worthy as the wide receiver 4, or do I just take a Deontay Johnson since I know I'm not taking a receiver in the 7th, and this is really going to be like a 4 receiver build before I come back to the position late, and I already have 2 Texans, which isn't a bad thing. I'm making a big bet on their offense. It's just they match a bye, and they're probably not hyper likely to hit the same week all the time. I think it's a more likely that they both hit in 1 week than they both fail in a week. You're probably getting them ping-ponging a little bit and then potentially both hitting in the same week at times. I'm going to take Deontay. I kind of talked myself into this is a lower volume wide receiver build. It's tough to pass Worthy in the 6th round behind ADP when I just talked about, how exciting he is. But some of the concerns about him not playing much I just talked about when I said, what if you're wrong? When I just took him at a higher pick than the one I just took Deontay Johnson at. If we see some of those concerns play out and Worthy's not actually on the field a ton, etc., it's really hurtful for this build. I think Deontay is going to provide a real solid weekly stability to this build in terms of targets. All right. Oh my God, there's still so many drafts. All right, BBM. 4 hours left on this clock. Justin Jefferson, Jonathan Taylor, Stefon Diggs, Christian Kirk, Kyle Pitts, Xavier Worthy. Again, I went with a 2nd round running back. I'm trying to do some more of that. Mostly you're seeing it in the slow puppies. This is a BBM. I'm trying, I think Jonathan Taylor can be elite. What you're not seeing is me taking Isaiah Pacheco or Josh Jacobs or Derrick Henry or James Cook. I think this range is particularly difficult to take running backs in. I did take ETN in that one. So because I'm typically not taking the running backs in the dead zone 4, 5, 6, I don't want every draft to be 0 RB. I'm going out of my way a little bit to get exposure to the running backs I think at the top have like legendary upside. I've taken more McCaffrey when I get the very early picks, obviously. I've taken some builds that are Bijan and Brees heavy. Gibbs, I've taken a little bit. You've seen Taylor and then Achane and then a little Kyron as well in the third. Not Saquon for me, and basically not anyone else until you might see me take some Kenneth Walker when he's sliding on a team that is a 0 RB team. In this one, Jonathan Taylor in the second round with Justin Jefferson. I took him over Waddle, but Jefferson and Waddle match buys. I did do a Jefferson and Waddle build. I'm sure some people are going to be off that because of the match buys, so I thought it might be a little unique, and I like both players a ton. But I just didn't want like a bunch of builds where my first two receivers have the same buy. I don't know. Probably overthinking that. But I decided Taylor behind ADP was worth grabbing. I get Pitts in the 5th still because I still want to get those elite tight ends where I can. I take Worthy as the 4th receiver in this build, similar to the situation I was just in. But I decided on this build to take him over Deontay. But man, all of this pays off because I get JSN at ADP here where I feel like that just doesn't ever happen. I love JSN at pick 77, especially on a build where I was able to go. I mean, we talked about how the 7th round, when you're picking in the first few picks, you can get these guys. You're not going to get them at the end of the 7th round. 705, I'm able to get JSN there in a draft where, now it's Keon Coleman, and I still think he's draftable in the late 7th as a wide receiver 5. You've seen me do that as well. Jamison Williams, I suppose. I think he's a little more expensive than he should be. And then, you're pretty clearly through the wide receiver window. And I just think I've started to come off of the Samuel, Sutton, Lockett group. I took a lot of them earlier on. It's just like, man, I don't know if the ceiling is there. I'm mostly coming off of them because I'm making sure to get the receivers early. If I didn't have the receivers early, I could see picking in that pocket. Especially when you start to get to like Shaheed and stuff. I think Shaheed is overvalued relative to actual volume earning. Khalil Shakir relative to what he's actually done. This is like outside the wide receiver window, clearly. Brandon Cooks at 114. Come on, guys. Like the dude had a 13% targets per hour run last year. Khalil Shakir had a very low targets per hour run last year. Like these are, then you can start to make your picks in the Dontavian Wicks, Jerry Jeudy, AD Mitchell range, right? Mike Williams maybe a little bit. At this price, I'd be willing to mix in. Or else you're way back here. You're at Wan'Dale Robinson, Demarcus Robinson, Troy Franklin, Marvin Mims. You got to get your receivers. I don't subscribe to the I think Xavier Leggette's a good pick. I don't subscribe to the Ricky Pearsall. I'm not as high on Jalen Polk as some of my close ideological buddies in the industry. I know Pat Kerrane and Jacob Sanderson are both drafting a lot of Jalen Polk. Not so much for me. Sorry, I'm just kind of looking through the wide receiver stuff, thinking about my overall structures and strategies and always trying to reconsider that stuff. This is fine. It says there's a wide receiver dead zone between Keon Coleman and Jalen Polk. I think it extends past Jalen Polk. All right, let's do a few more picks. Here's a BBM. When I say a few more, I mean all the picks. I've said this before. I'm not going to get off stream with more picks to do. I might as well do them on stream. But I got to make these picks reasonably quickly. I'm recording with Leonie this afternoon. I got to take my daughter to a sleepover. Told her between streams I would do that. Apparently, there's other things to do in life other than just stream all the time. All right. Garrett Wilson, Drake London. I took Kyron at 35 in this one. Just mentioned I'm taking some of him as the anchor running back when he falls. And then Tank Dell. So this is another one of those late draft slot situations where I did go running back. And so I'm probably not going to get 5 receivers through 6 because I can't justify taking this Calvin Ridley, Chris Godwin tier of receivers, 2 of them over Kyle Pitts, who's sitting there. And I actually have London on this team too. I can build out a Cousins double. Xavier Worthy, Adunze. I mean, yeah, I can just pull up Deontay Johnson. I could take Godwin and then take Johnson. They have a 17 correlation. Put the chair back on. He was crushing it. Just go take my daughter to her sleepover and leave the chair on. Oh, that's great. 2-year picks on other people's streams. That's good. Yeah, and also I did take Tank here. You know, I've been talking about Diggs early on this stream, talked a lot about Diggs, why I don't think you can take Tank over Diggs. But if Tank's there at 38 in the 4th round, I still want access to Tank Dell's ceiling in the way that I think he can score. So, yeah, the big question is, do you go receiver here? Do you go Godwin and Worthy or Godwin and Deontay or whatever? You know, Adunze, DeAndre Hopkins. These guys are all draftable. They're all solid. There won't be easily draftable picks at the 7-8. But to make that happen, I have to bypass Kyle Pitts, who I'm trying to get more of. And I really believe in the elite tight end element of builds this year. I know I'm doing it in like every single draft, and I'm okay with that. The market has not, I'm not going to say the market has not caught up because that assumes I'm right, but the market has not bought into that. And as long as that's something that I think is a clear opportunity, and I've thought it was a clear opportunity all offseason, I want as much of my portfolio to reflect that as possible. So even when I start to do Kyron anchor teams, I want it to reflect that elite tight ends to me are just like, this is, I already made the bet on the Atlanta offense. Is very similar to what I just said about the Bijan Pitts correlation thing. I mean, if Drake London's right at pick 14, then Kyle Pitts is right at pick 59. It just is. We're going to star Kirk Cousins for the future of this build. We're clearly going to take a receiver with the next pick. Probably Godwin if he makes it around, because I just need some... honestly, it's probably just Deontay. I don't care about his ADP. Like, I'll just keep taking him higher and higher and higher. Why is Deontay Johnson going behind George Pickens? Like, he's going 3 rounds behind him. Once he gets to the 4th round, I'll stop worrying about the fact that I'm taking him 10 picks ahead of ADP every time. All right, here's another BBM. Jamar Chase, Davante Adams, a little bit behind ADP. I've talked through, I'm not trying to take a ton of Adams, but I'm talked through him a little bit on this stream. A lot of volume there. You start Chase Adams, it really opens up that neighbor's pick in the 3rd round. Feels solid. I took Hollywood Brown in this one. Don't take a lot of him. Took him right at cost. Intrigued by that. Took Deontay ahead of ADP in this one. I took Trey McBride in between there. Let's look at that Hollywood Brown pick. I took him right after Keenan and before a Jaden Reed selection. It's mostly been Reed for me there. I guess because I didn't have Kelsey and knew that Worthy and Rice wouldn't come back, I was kind of looking at this like, I don't take enough Hollywood Brown in this spot where I at least get some access to Casey's passing upside. So many of my builds have a Kelsey, Worthy, or Rashee Rice on it. But now, if you're in this 4-5 range and Kelsey didn't fall in that particular draft, you're probably not going to get Worthy and Rice coming back to you. So Hollywood Brown is the one way to sort of, on this side of the board right now, access KC receiving ceiling. It's very possible that like Worthy is held back a little and Hollywood Brown has a strong year. I mean, I don't think that's impossible. I just think the way that he hits is not as exciting as the way that Xavier Worthy hits. Again, talking through tail outcomes, these marginal differences in the range of probabilities and the probabilistic, all that crap that I like to talk about. What, being overly precise on the top 1 percentile of outcomes. And I understand for a lot of people, it's like, you're ridiculous. And then, for other people, you're like, yeah, that's how you win. Like that's what it is. It's so funny that, 75%, 80% of what wins in this is determined by the literal top 1% of outcomes for players, being really exact on the top 5 percentiles or whatever. The extreme ceiling stuff and the other 95% of the range of outcomes, whether a guy's a small hit, small loss, whatever, yada, yada, most of that doesn't really matter. I mean, yeah, like when a guy busts, when you have, if Xavier Worthy is this year's Quentin Johnston, like that's really bad for your build. But first of all, you're going to have misses in these builds. People think you have to get all 18 picks right, and you just don't. You're going to have some misses. You have to be willing to have misses, or you're going to find the wrong picks. You're going to be trying to pick floor at all costs, and then you're going to still have misses because that's what happens. So, yes, like I had some teams at Quentin Johnson last year that were in the hunt late. And I was like, man, if I could just get one Quentin Johnson week in week 16, this team could make the final. Didn't happen. But, I mean, you're not dead because you missed on one player. Obviously, you don't want that outcome. But that's the other part of it is like when those outcomes do happen, okay, so that one team is dead, but you're building a whole portfolio for a reason. What you're trying to get within that portfolio is the one team that makes it to the final. We're all trying to get one team through. We're drafting hundreds of teams. We want one team that matters in week 17. And to make that happen, it's less about, okay, how this one miss could ruin this one build. And it's more about, well, what does that extreme top 97th percentile outcome look like? How can I be super precise on what I'm assuming is even possible here? Which does overlap with all the rest of the range of our outcomes. So like when I talk about, a good follow-up question would be, why do you draft so much Deontay Johnson? When I talk about Deontay Johnson, I'm talking about that target range and what that can mean for the really extreme outcomes. I mean, there are guys where I don't think their extreme ceiling is that big. Maybe I'm drafting too much Deontay Johnson. I don't know. But I think that his 50th percentile outcome is so clearly above his cost. I think his 30th percentile outcome is above his cost. When you get into that part of the conversation, you're like, okay, well, I'll take him because there's just a lot of opportunity to beat cost. And then there's, I think, still upside. I think there's scenarios for this year where Bryce Young takes a step forward, right? That's the big part of it. Does Bryce Young take a step forward this year? Does Dave Canales help Bryce Young? If that happens, I think you're talking about 150 good targets for Deontay Johnson. That's a big hit in the 6th round. Not sure why I got off on that tangent. I was talking a little bit about Hollywood Brown, so maybe it had something to do with that. But this is a round 7 pick where I have 5 receivers already and a tight end. Rachaad White is a clear ADP value, 13 picks behind ADP. The best receiver is Jordan Addison, who might get suspended and nobody wants to draft. And I already have 5. Do I want to take a 6th receiver here? Best tight end is Jake Ferguson, then Brock Bowers. I could take Brock Bowers at pick 76. Evan Ingram just went 2 picks ago. I don't have to take him that high necessarily. There's a possibility that he comes all the way back around. I pick at 93. Brock Bowers' ADP is 96. So actually very likely available at my next pick. Not very likely, but somewhat plausible that he's available at my next pick. Kyler Murray is the top quarterback, and I do have Trey McBride in this build. Spoiler alert, there was no scenario where I was going to draft Rachaad White, even at a 12.5% discount or pick discount. And I understand, and he actually correlates with Deontay Johnson, and I understand why that's frankly probably wrong. If you can get a 0 RB build where you can get these 5 receivers, Jamar Chase, Davante Adams, Malik Neighbors, Hollywood Brown, and Deontay Johnson, and you have Trey McBride stacked up, and there's a correlation boost to Rachaad White, you probably should just take the ADP gift and take Rachaad White at that point. At that point, you're talking about the opportunity cost being less. You're basically through the wide receiver window. If Rachaad White was going where Najee Harris is going, I would take Rachaad White. But I still don't even draft much Najee Harris, and I don't think Rachaad White's very good. I mean, he's a bad rusher, but he's a good receiving back, and they like him and they use him a lot. And I'm kind of talking myself into Rachaad White. That wide receiver window stuff, the opportunity cost at this point, there's no tight end opportunity cost at this point. I mean, I could lose out on Bowers, but I'm not going to take a tight end here regardless. I don't think I have to add Addison to this build. I already have the 5 receivers. I think that's a little bit of an overkill play, although I think it's certainly possible to take Addison here. The big alternative to White is Kyler Murray, who's a really intriguing play, and I'm already making the McBride play, and I think that Arizona could be this really interesting offense this year. But I'm going to have plenty of Kyler with McBride in the 7th round in these spots. Is this the one where I say, okay, like I went 5 receivers in the first 6. I can take 1 share of Rachaad White at pick 76 after David Montgomery? Existential crisis time, guys. I mean, I'd be taking Kyler 3.5 picks ahead of ADP. There's a possibility Kyler gets back around. I mean, not likely. The Marvin Harrison drafter ends up taking him a lot. One of the things I've been realizing with Kyler in these Trey McBride ones is you have to take him a few picks ahead of ADP. You always want to push quarterback, but if you don't take him ahead of ADP, then by the time he reaches the other turn, he's behind ADP when the Marvin Harrison drafter gets him. So the Marvin Harrison drafter in this draft picks at 83 and 86. Kyler's ADP is 79.5. Even if he doesn't take him at 83, he pushes him around the turn. Is he really going to pass him again at 86 when he has Marvin Harrison in his build? I mean, he actually has Josh Allen in this build, so maybe in this particular room, but in most rooms, probably not. And then a lot of people talk themselves into unstacked mobile quarterbacks, and especially with Kyler, they can say, well, I could take Michael Wilson, I could take Zay Jones, I could take Greg Dortch. There are 3 late Arizona receivers that do get drafted. I love this. Rather take Bucky or McMillan for correlation than Rachaad. That's a good point. I'd take Bucky Irving in like every draft. I hear you. It's a good point. I don't have to get this correlation here if I want to get Carolina, Tampa Bay correlation. If I push Kyler, even if he makes it back, it means I probably miss out on Bowers. I don't have the 2 tight ends I want to have. Chat says I'm basically Burrow or bust for stacking if I don't take Kyler. Because I have Hollywood Brown and KC's already off. I have Burrow with Chase. And then Adams is pretty unstackable. Malik Neighbors, I think Daniel Jones is more draftable than most. Deontay Johnson, I'm not taking a lot of Bryce, but I could theoretically take him. But I see the point. It's a fair point. This build has a lot of receivers from quarterbacks that are not easy clicks. Or Mahomes, who's already gone. Or Burrow, which is right. I mean, he would have to be the next pick. If I went Rachaad White here, then Burrow has to be the next pick. Then I'm not getting Bowers anyway. All right, cool. We successfully talked me off of taking the Rachaad White pick. I appreciate that. I appreciate you guys talking me out of that existential crisis. We take Kyler Murray and Trey McBride stacked. Kitmo says Burrow will probably be taken by the Higgins guy on the way back. That makes sense. Probably had no shot to get Burrow, right? Had to take Kyler. Just unfortunate that I wasn't able to get that ADP value for Rachaad White. This is why you guys are here, to help me make better decisions. All right, Breece Hall, Drake London, and then I take the Kyren value, and then I take a Michael Pittman fall because this is a puppy. Yeah, I was wondering if this was a BBM or a puppy. We're having some fun in this puppy. I took Breece at the 109, London in the second round, and then I was like, all right, Kyren Williams is falling. I'll go ahead and take him. Tons of receivers going off the board. I'm like, I'm going to try to not play the wide receiver avalanche. My pick at 33 would have been T. Higgins, Zay Flowers, Stefon Diggs, Tank Dell went in the 3 picks prior to that. 33 is the 309, and all those guys were already gone. So I took Kyren at the ADP value and went Breece Kyren, which meant I really had to take a receiver in the 4th. Even though Kelsey was on the board and I would have loved to take Kelsey, I took the Michael Pittman discount. He was the slider. Higgins did go off at the 3-4 turn. So I take Pittman to give me a second receiver. And then in the 5th, you're like, okay, I definitely have to take a receiver here as well. And now that I see that Kyle Pitts has also already gone off in the 5th, this is a draft that's more like the way that I would draft, right? Like, other than Kelsey sliding, like if Andrews is gone, fine, just take Pitts way ahead of ADP, right? Like that's the way I like to do it in the 5th round. And then the other stuff about the 3rd round, like, yeah, just take Zay in the middle of the 3rd. That's fine. I don't care if their ADP is the 3-4 turn. Just take them in the 3rd. So I'm not going to take a tight end, maybe, at 64, but probably this can be a non-elite tight end room. At this point, I went too early running backs. I passed on Kelsey for Pittman. I probably would have taken Kelsey if Pittman had gone, but I mean, it's like, what if I'm wrong on Pittman? He's 6 picks behind ADP in an avalanche room where every receiver is going really high. George Pickens went at 401. T. Higgins went at 312. Again, Zay Flowers was off the board by 308. Tank Dell was off the board by 306. And so in this type of room, getting the Pittman value and just saying, fine, the RPO stuff is still there. It exists in the data. Maybe Richardson gets hurt again and Flacco comes in and Flacco elevates Pittman late season the way that he elevated Amari last year and Njoku, the way that Minshew elevated Pittman last year. So anyway, I took Pittman in a Breece Hall Kyren build here, but I think because of, these first 4 rounds and I don't take Kelsey and then Pitts goes, I'm not going to push up Kittle here when I only have 2 receivers. Maybe I take Kittle in the next round if he comes back around, but honestly, like that's going to be my last chance to get the wide receiver 4 in the 6th because the late 7th, pick 81, I'm probably not getting anyone. I mean, maybe Jordan Addison falls there. And I'd probably take him on this build. This has to be a receiver pick. The next pick has to be a receiver pick. What's up, Steph? I mean, Godwin's right there. Then Xavier Worthy, then Rashee Rice. The thing about the suspension is like, yeah, it sucks. But also, if you don't have wide receiver firepower, if you have Drake London and Michael Pittman and that's all you've taken, then I think you need to lean into the variance with Rashee Rice and say, well, if he doesn't get suspended at all, or it's a short suspension or whatever, and I'm able to survive the games he's out, he can play like a 2nd round pick for me, which is what this build now needs. Betty says Cleveland making a point to sign 2 of the top end backups. I feel like should say more bad for Watson than we're currently taking into account. 2? You're referencing Jameis Winston. Oh, and Tyler Huntley is what you're referencing. They let Flacco go. They got Winston for cheaper than Flacco. Jameis Winston, I think. Or maybe I'm going to check that. 1 year, $4 million fully guaranteed contract for Jameis. Flacco got a 1-year, $4.5 million fully guaranteed contract. So they had to pay Jameis $500,000 less. It was close. There's another bonus in Flacco so that his cap number is $5 million. I don't know what that other bonus is, but maybe Jameis's cap number is actually only $1.7 million. They did a couple void years and prorated a signing bonus over 5 years. And so he has a cap number into 2025. I think this is the thing that I saw. I think they had to let Flacco go because they had to do some little bit of creative accounting with Winston's contract as well. I actually don't think they did like they made backup QB a priority. I agree. They also gave Tyler Huntley the money that you mentioned. It looks like he got only about $500,000 guaranteed, but he got about $1.2 million on the cap. So on his cap number. So he gets, so they have 3 QBs. They paid more to Winston and Huntley than Flacco, although the cap number is lower with both of them combined. And I think part of it was like the way that they were able to get the cap number to work. It obviously says a lot about Dorian Thompson-Robinson, who's their other backup, but their money already a mess. Why get 2 of them? Yeah, the 2 of them thing is interesting to me as well. It's definitely not great for Watson that they went and got Winston too. I agree with your general point, but I do think as far as we're not making as big of a deal about it. It's worth noting that they had a successful backup last year who led them to the playoffs and all this stuff, and then they had to let him walk. Some of that's I think just cap related. They probably couldn't give Flacco the guarantees and the current year cap money that. I don't know. I don't know why that would actually matter that much to add all the void years for Joe Flacco, but he got a little more money from the Colts as well, and maybe the structure is more beneficial to him for whatever reason. Or maybe it's just the $500,000. Yeah, I don't know. The Watson stuff is weird. Can you do a quick recap of everything you talked about while it's gone? You're the best. Thanks. So the quick recap is that I can't do a quick recap of anything. There you go. All right. I got a few slow puppies to hit here. Amon-Ra, Debo, Kyron in the 3rd, Trey McBride in the 4th, Hollywood, Deontay, and I don't get anything in the 7th. JSN's gone. Brian Thomas, even Jordan Addison's gone. That's what happens. Even at the 6th draft slot, if you take Kyron and McBride, you only get 4 receivers. Keon Coleman's there. Now, this is a slot where I could take Kyler with McBride. I have Kyron as a bring back on that Arizona Rams game. I have Deontay as a bring back on Arizona's Week 16 game. There's no tight end to take. This is going to be a Kyler pick. I like this stack with Kyron in there and Deontay in there. I think it's an Arizona bet. Now we have a Week 16 and a Week 17 bring back on that, but only have 4 receivers. All right. What was this? I don't know what I just clicked on. It was a BBM. All right. Bijan, Waddle, Diggs, Kirk in the 4th. I guess I just wanted to mix it up a little. I think Kirk's price is a little bit tricky. I would take McBride there in a vacuum, but on this one I decided to go Kirk, probably to set up a Kyle Pitts pick in the 5th because I'm not getting enough Pitts. Oh, because I had Bijan. I think this was intentional. We're going to go Bijan Pitts in this one as well. And just keep it moving. That team's only going to have 4 receivers through 6 and then probably not be able to get one in the 7th. That's the gamble, man. I think So like the research Hayden has done in the past, 4 through 7, and then it's 5 through 10 is the other key thing. Like most of these is 4 or 5 receivers through 7, 5 or 6 through 10. 6 or 7 total. You want receiver value early, and you don't need a ton of receivers, or maybe it was 7 or 8 receivers total. Sorry, I was just looking at the chat a little bit. And thinking these are all puppies. All right, let's do the last couple of BBMs and eliminators, and then we'll just kind of try to fly through the puppies and get out of here because I got to go pretty quick. Amon-Ra, Davante Adams, Mike Evans. I take Trey McBride in the 4th. Evans is a unique pick for me. I don't take a ton of him, but he falls into the 3rd a little bit, and I decided to get a little exposure there. Jaden Reed, I take Deontay Johnson. I figured once I took Evans that Deontay Johnson was on the board for this team. So Amon-Ra, Adams, Evans, McBride, Jaden Reed, Deontay. Through 6 rounds, it gets to 5 receivers and a tight end. Addison does fall in this one. And Kyler's also there. I mean, this is the Trey McBride in the 4th, Kyler in the 7th thing with the 5 receivers. This team does have Goff, Mayfield, Love, and possibly Bryce Young as stack partners if I don't go Kyler. I kind of want to go Addison with this one. I mean, one of the things about getting to like 6 receivers in a spot like this is everyone, because of the Avalanche, everyone's having to play thinner, right? And so like way back when Sean first wrote about Zero RB, he was talking about trying to get 6 of the eventual top 15 wide receivers. And you could do that because running backs went so high, you could just like take 6 early receivers that were all like, in a way you can't now. Right? Like it's like we're in the 7th round here, and I can't take a like there's one elite upside type receiver left. Keon Coleman has already gone, and I'm looking at Addison as like the only last opportunity before we're in the Curtis Samuel, Tyler Lockett, like veterans without real screaming upside tier. And I don't even know that Addison necessarily has some massive upside in him, but a really efficient rookie year is typically a positive for a guy's growth, and he had a really good profile, and there's a lot that you should like about him. Ken Siglieri says Addison's a falling knife in all caps. I don't know why you guys are writing all caps. I read most of the comments. It's not like it's going to make it stand up, but I disagree. His ADP is falling, but a falling knife refers to like you don't want to catch a falling knife. He still has upside. I mean, if he gets suspended for the whole year and doesn't play, that's a problem, but he still has the second year breakout profile that at this point is like one of the last real upside profiles. Now, I'm factoring in that he might only get suspended for a couple games, 3 games, 4 games, whatever. If he gets suspended for a meaningful amount of time, that could be a huge issue. And the offense is a potential huge issue with a rookie quarterback. Like, I get all that. Correlates with Jaden Reed on this build. He is an intriguing pick here, but I don't know. I was just talking through this idea of like if you do get the opportunity to get to the 6th receiver, it actually gets you unique. You could have wide receiver firepower in a way that few rosters could. And then if you are able to hit on the late running back scoring that is going to be there in this ecosystem this year, I mean, that's how you build a tournament winning team. having said that, I do think Addison gets a little cheaper than this. Man, he's just a tricky one because he is one where the price is going to be sliding, and this just feels. I don't know. I took him at 79 a little bit ago and justified it. Now this is 77. Consigliere is saying it'll be double counted. Bet you he's there when you come back. So you're not saying you're out on drafting him, which means, in my opinion, I wouldn't refer to him as a falling knife because falling knife, the idea is you don't catch a falling knife. You're saying you just want to get an even better price on him. A little bit of a different point, at least as far as the way that I think about it. And I don't mind that point. I don't think he'll be there when I come back. I'm still seeing him go in a lot of these. People are really tied to ADP in the slows. I think even more so than the fast drafts, which is kind of weird because the fast drafts are like you got to make these quick decisions. You feel like people would just look at the top of the queue, I think. But when people have time to think about it, it's harder for a guy to just keep sliding and then sit there at the top of the queue and you're like, oh, he's a 6-pick ADP value. But like in fast drafts, you'll get a 12, 20-pick ADP value sometimes because people are focused on what they're focused on and what they've done correlation-wise and what they've set up, and they just do that, and they're sometimes just not paying attention to ADP. I will go Kyler here. I think another Kyler share is warranted. 5 receiver build already. Kyler does have some pretty unique QB upside. I have McBride there. It's fair. It's a fair pick. Oh, I just got on the clock in another BBM. All right, I got to make these picks because I got to take my daughter to her sleepover. It's the 5-6 turn here, Drake London. And so then this is, that 12-13 pick where you can't build intelligently. I talked about Jacob Sanderson wrote a great article about doing some creative stuff in those spots, some of the correlation things. One of the things I tried to do here, and I try to do in a couple of my pick 12 spots, because I think I started to see the correlation things. And one of you guys mentioned in the chat on my last stream that Olave Adams is going to be more popular because people are talking about, well, you could pull up both Chris Olave and Davante Adams because they correlate. And so also Gibbs, Debo, and Gibbs Ayuk are going to be popular, especially Gibbs Ayuk because he's going higher than Debo. I reached past Ayuk to grab Debo in one of my Gibbs spots. But to do 2 uncorrelated players at the 12, 13 for uniqueness, that's something like, because the correlated ones, it's fun to build in that correlation, but then if they start to get popular, they're not even unique. So I just picked 2 random uncorrelated players that don't have ADPs close enough. Like Waddle's probably not going to get all the way up to 13. I took London ahead of Harrison. I just don't think there's going to be a lot of London Waddle builds. London's ADP is 14.6. I take him at 12. And so the whole point here is just like uniqueness, solely uniqueness. Next turn, I took Zay Flowers and Laporta. I'm back on the clock at 5-6. This is where you run out of. These are your last 2 chances to take a receiver. You're not going to get one at the 7-8 turn. So if you want to get to 5 receivers in the first 10 rounds, you kind of have to do it now. You have to do it 5 in the first 6 rounds. That's sort of the point I was trying to make when I was talking about Hayden's tweet. I didn't finish saying is that it's 4 or 5 receivers through 7, and then it's 5 or 6 receivers through 10. And people love to just say, well, you need 4 through 7 and then quit. And it's not what the data shows us, man. The data shows us you'd rather be at 6 through 10 than 4 through 10. And so if you're not going to do it in the 8, 9, 10 rounds to add another receiver on, and I understand the data can be different in different years as well. There's been some good arguments that, things could be a little bit unique this year. But I want to try to get to 5 receivers before the window closes, basically. And this year it closes earlier. In the past, you could take a Garrett Wilson in the 9th or 10th round, and that was that 5th receiver that you tacked on. You can't, when he was a rookie, you can't take that type of rookie profile there anymore. You have to take him here. You have to take a Dunze or Xavier Worthy here. So anyway, this is Drake London, Jalen Waddle, Zay Flowers start. I'm going to take Rashee Rice in this one over Worthy, who's falling as Rice rises. I want to try to continue to get some Rice before he gets, really expensive. And then I'm going to take, I was going to take a Dunze with Rice. So I haven't been taking a lot of a Dunze today. I could just take Rice and Worthy together. Kind of wanted to get a rookie into this build because I think it's pretty stable otherwise. London Waddle, Zay Flowers, Rashee Rice. I think there's a lot of target stability and volume there when those guys are all in the field. So it's not like a DeAndre Hopkins or a pull up a Deontay Johnson for this texture of this receiver room is sort of what I'm thinking. I don't want to go down to Ladd. So it really is. It's Xavier or I'm trying to think if there's another way to play that. I could pull up JSN would kind of accomplish something similar, but I don't want to go that far down. It's tough for me to take a Dunze over Worthy straight up. But I did just take Rashee Rice. So let's just do it this way on this build. We're going to take a Dunze as that wide receiver 5. All right. Oh, that was a BBM too. All right. Well, hopefully that was right. Man, I just keep getting on the clock in more drafts. I still have 3 BBMs. I just did one. I'm never going to get off this stream. I got to get going. All right. 7-11, Addison and JSN both made it back. And this is one of those drafts where I only got 4. So this is one of the ways that, if you do go limited receiver, it can pay off. So I went Puka, Nico, Zay. I took Laporta at 4, Keenan Allen at 5, and then I went CJ Stroud. I mean, not even that much of a discount on Stroud, but I had Nico and Zay, and I wanted to build out that game stack, I guess. I don't know. And yet it pays off because I get JSN to come back to me. I was just talking about taking JSN at the 5-6. I get him at 7-11 in this draft. But I took Stroud ahead of ADP when he's really been sliding in some. I don't know what that pick was. I mean, it's not a pick that I want to make frequently ahead of some of the receivers that I took Stroud ahead of. Dunze, Rashee Rice, and Xavier Worthy were all on the board. Deontay Johnson, DeAndre Hopkins. These guys, it's a fascinating pick there where I really risked not getting the 5th receiver, and yet it paid off. I wish this paid off in a bigger way where I had, rather than taking a reach on Stroud, this is why I'm so confused or annoyed or whatever. Rather than taking Stroud ahead of ADP as one of my 2 detours here, I wish what I had was I get a good price on Laporta in the early 4th, but I also wish I had a really good price on I could have went Kyron at 35, and you see me do that on some of the other builds. I let him go. He goes at 36. I could have taken him in the late 3rd if I had a good price on an anchor running back in this build somewhere, and I let him go because I have Puka in the 1st here. I don't think I want both of those guys, too frequently stacked up together, for reasons that are kind of hard to articulate, and I think it's probably okay as well. But yeah, I kind of wish that my other detour here was something impactful, like an anchor running back, more impactful than reaching on a QB for a stack, more of a pocket passing QB. I do really like Stroud, and I still think he's a fine pick at the 5-6 turn, and I think he's fallen too far. And that's part of the reason I took him. I still made this pick. Some, version of me at some point during the day was like, this is a good pick. But looking back on it, it's not the way that I'd want to play that. I want a receiver there. Or if I'm taking a second detour in those first 6 rounds from a late draft slot, I want it to be something that can really impact things. Taking Stroud at 62 when he routinely falls to 75 is there's going to be other Stroud builds that are. And I would have liked to do it if I had Nico and Diggs as well. But I only had Nico on that build. I did have the bring back, but it's not I had the best build for it either. So anyway, a couple more BBMs here. Then we'll start firing off we got the eliminators. We got the slow puppies. Okay. This is Bijan. This is one where I also got JSN to fall into the 7th. So Bijan, Waddle, Diggs, T. Higgins, Pitts, Rashee Rice. I take JSN in the 7th here ahead of Stroud. It's so funny in contrast to the last one. Stroud fell to the 81 in this, and I have Diggs. I would have had a Stroud single stack here, but I couldn't pass up JSN in this room. For some reason, in the other room, I took Stroud at 62. In this room, I didn't take him at 79 because I thought it was such a unique opportunity to get my wide receiver 5 as JSN. Fascinating look at my psychology where there's a pretty significant inconsistency there. I have both Bijan and Pitts on this team, which makes Jaden Daniels somewhat interesting. I got the 5 running back or the 5 receivers. There's not another receiver pick here. Bowers went 2 picks ahead of me, so I can't get him at pick 90 here. So Pitts is going to be kind of the lone tight end for now. The pick is probably, I do have T. Higgins with, oh no, it's Cincinnati, Denver. I keep doing the Cincinnati, Cleveland, the 2 Ohio teams. Like I was going to say with Waddle, but Waddle is paired up with Cleveland. Cincinnati, I could take Burrow, is what I was going to say. But I already have 2 Atlanta players. I could do Daniels or Cousins and still do Tua later. I could still do Geno potentially. I think the pick here feels like one of these 2 running backs as opposed to reaching on a QB that, I don't think I need to take Burrow here. I think it's a good opportunity to get a piece of James Conner, who had a really good year last year. And I think, again, I'm high on the Arizona offense. So I'm going to take Conner there. I'm going to keep, Burrow will definitely be an option if he somehow falls through. And then Jane Daniels will be an option at the next turn as well. I already got the 5 receivers. I wanted to get my second running back there because I think I'm likely to take another QB there or possibly a second tight end if like Njoku falls through. It's a Waddle and Njoku thing. So those are kind of the 3 picks I'd be looking at the 103. They all have ADPs higher than that. They could all go, at which point I'd be a little bummed. But I thought it made some sense to get a running back pick in there. All right. One more BBM, and then we are done with that. We have a couple eliminators and then a bunch of slow puppies. Kyron. Okay, so this was a Garrett Wilson, Drake London. Kyron at pick 35 again, 311. This guy's falling a ton. I get Tank in the 4th. Kyle Pitts in the 5th. I think we already looked at this earlier, and then I starred a bunch of these names. I think I took Pitts. These 2 guys went at the turn. I moved Deontay to the top because I was saying I need a wide receiver 4 in this build, and I liked Deontay as the answer to that, even though his cost is significantly lower. I'm trying to see if there's any correlation stuff that I want to consider, any reason that I should grab Worthy or Godwin, who are the other 2 guys in the queue. With Garrett Wilson, London, Tank, I think I could take Xavier Worthy here. It's just Worthy was the reason I passed on Worthy in some of these is was my highest owned receiver before this play, this build thing. And I'm still taking plenty of him. And as he slid, like I run the risk of being like 45% exposed to Worthy. And I do see scenarios where he's not. Like Deontay is a guy where I would be more comfortable that exposed to him because I see scenarios where Worthy's nothing and really an anchor on a lot of builds. And I was talking about that. If you have that Quentin Johnston, like it's a problem. Like I was saying, you can succeed despite it, but it is a problem. I'd take Deontay Johnson there. That was a weaker receiver build, needed, I think, the stability of Deontay, who I'm taking a lot of. So now let's go over to these 2 eliminators. This one I started receiver times 3, Puka, Nico, and Diggs. Interesting that I went both Houston guys in the eliminator. Part of the reason I'm willing to do that is, again, the week 14 bye, you make it there, you already 10x. You're playing it like a little bit of a cash game. I don't mind doing like a big Houston bet on the eliminator, getting the stack element, getting some weekly spike potential. If they're the team that really goes off this year, it gets me to week 14. And that's, hard enough in this. I start with the 3 receivers. Laporta and Kelsey went in the 3 picks ahead of me. Again, in the eliminator, I want to build ceiling, and I don't love these receivers. It's not about stability and floor for me. It's about upside, and I'm going to take Trey McBride here. I'm going to go. I think that's the optimal way to play it. Basically, you've seen me do that in a lot of these builds. It correlates with Puka if I do make the final. I'm going to go back to receiver in the 5th. Start considering Stroud 6th, 7th, whenever that happens. It's going to be one of these guys. Next pick, I'm going to need to get a 4th receiver. All right, let's go to the other eliminator. This one I started with Gibbs, which I don't typically do, but he does have a nice buy for the format. I go Garrett Wilson and Gibbs at the turn, Zay Higgins, Godwin, Kittle, and then I hit Keon Coleman at a little bit of an ADP discount as my wide receiver 5 in the late 7th. So now I do have the 5 receivers, 3 of them with the week 12 bye. We did this one earlier on the stream as well. This is one that has popped back up. The pick here is probably a running back. I don't have any. I don't. Burrow's a stack option, but I don't think I want to go there right now ahead of ADP. Kyler's behind ADP meaningfully, but I don't have him stacked. And I kind of just have been wanting to push QB a little bit more. I can take Aaron Rodgers with Garrett Wilson. I can take Baker with Godwin. I'm missing the QBs on Zay and Keon, and I'll probably miss Purdy. There's a possibility he comes back around, and he could be my QB1. Oh, actually, my ADP would suggest that he should come back around. So that's interesting. Makes me more confident in passing on Burrow here. I do have some other outs. Obviously, still need to add wide receivers and tight ends to this build as well. So I can backstack some stuff later. Oh, I could take Bowers and then be done at tight end. I was gonna probably take James Conner or Jalen Warren. But I already have Gibbs. I don't really need an RB2 in this build. I'm going to take Bowers. I think that's the cleanest pick. Frees up a roster spot in the eliminator format, which I really like, the 2 tight end builds. All right, bunch of slow puppies to get through. Got to hurry through these. Got to run shortly. Told my daughter I'd drop her off at the top of this hour. It's a little bit of a drive. Consigliere said, I agree. It's running back and Connor works well there. Psych. I decided to shift that. Let's see. Jonathan Taylor. It goes Jefferson, Taylor, Kyron on this one in a slow puppy. 2 early running backs. And then I went Trey McBride. And so then I went Keenan and Rashee Rice on the picks coming back. And then you're just done. In the 7th round, you got Jamison Williams, nothing else. And I only have 3 receivers because I went with 3 early detours. I can take Kyler with McBride, and I have Kyron. That's probably the pick. I'm going to do these quick. These are puppies. It's going to be a weak wide receiver room, but it's a bet on a different structure being acceptable in that draft. This one, I went Bijan, Waddle, Diggs, Amari, Reed. So 4 straight receivers. I do get Kittle to fall in the 6th, and then I take Ingram in the 7th, which is a little unique for me, but there was no wide receiver there. Curtis Samuel in the 8th as a wide receiver 5, also a somewhat unique pick. And then I take Jordan Love, who I have stacked with Jaden Reed with no bring back. This is kind of a unique build for me, but we're definitely into the running back sweet spot. Javonte Williams is there. I don't have an RB2. Let's keep this train moving and take Javonte Williams. Breece Hall, Chris Olave, Diggs, Kelsey in the 4th, and then right back to receiver with Rashee Rice, Xavier Worthy, and I did take the Keon Coleman pick in the 7th, and this one as well for my 5th receiver. Went back to Jalen Warren in the 8th. We're in the 9th now. I don't have any quarterbacks selected yet. This team has Olave, but it also has, so I could do Derek Carr late, but it also has Diggs. Can't do Stroud late. 3 KC receivers. I went Rice, Worthy, and Kelsey on this team. I mean, it's a slow puppy. We're getting wild out here. Keon Coleman has a Josh Allen element to it. None of those QBs are stackable. The only guy I can stack right now is Derek Carr or my running backs. Jaden Daniels is the ADP value, and I'm going to take him and have him be as like a backstack, rushing QB, whatever. Like this is the build where you need to go get Jaden Daniels because you're playing KC's pass rate, but you're not playing Mahomes. You're playing Daniels to be able to outscore Mahomes while KC goes off, which is actually not an insane, in the DFS landscape, people will talk about stacking the receivers of a pocket passer, but not play the quarterback, play a mobile QB, like basically not unstacked, but single stacked. And that you need the QB is the least important part of the stack, essentially. And you need the other mobile quarterback to outscore him. Jane Daniels can run for 100 yards in the final while, and 2 touchdowns, while Mahomes throws for, 280 and 2 or 3. And my guys still score well in the KC pass game, but Daniels outscores Mahomes potentially meaningfully. And so that's sort of the bet there. This other one, I went Breece Hall, Waddle, Diggs, Josh Allen sliding in the 4th because he pairs with Hall. Again, I'm getting a little quirky with these slow puppies. I took Rice in the 5th, way ahead of ADP because I needed to get another receiver. I didn't have access to Dalton Kincaid. Now here in the 6th, I still don't have a tight end, but I need a receiver. And the clear pick is Xavier Worthy, unless I want to go DeAndre Hopkins. I already have Rice. I don't mind stacking up the KC receivers. You've seen me do that a lot. Oh, I can also just go down to Deontay Johnson on this build, which it's a little bit of a wide receiver thin build, so I'm going to go ahead and do that. I don't really want to take Worthy with Rice, and Deontay is the next pick for me there. I bypass Kittle there. I bypass a little bit of, not ADP value anywhere else. Okay. 4 more picks. Slow puppies. These guys got to go off quick because I got to go. Breece Hall, Debo, Diggs, Kelsey, Jaden Reed, Deontay Johnson. 4 picks through 6. I'm not able to get one in the 7th. I did take Stroud in the 7th at pick 80 to pair with Diggs. Don't have a bring back there. Can address that late in Baltimore. Brock Bowers is there as a potential tight end 2. Jonathan Brooks is an appealing slight ADP value as an RB2. The receivers aren't great. Curtis Samuel, Cortland Sutton, but I could take the wide receiver 5. I'm going to take Bowers. I'll address wide receiver 5. At this point, that you can't go chase the wide receiver value that isn't there is basically my mentality. If I miss that window and I don't have enough wide receivers, I want an impactful pick there, and I think Bowers can be that. I don't know that the other receivers are just trying to fix something that was already a problem in my build earlier. We're at 7-10 in this one. I went Gibbs, Garrett Wilson and Gibbs at the 1-2 turn. I went Flowers and Kelsey at the 3-4. Then I got Xavier Worthy and Deontay at the 5-6. And again, this is one of those late draft slots where I only got 4 through 6, and you don't get an opportunity to go again in the 7th. Keon Coleman and Jamison Williams have both gone, but the slider is in this draft room, Jordan Addison. And this is the point where I definitely am happy to take Addison in a draft where I didn't get that 5th receiver. And I think, after Keon Coleman and Jamison Williams have gone, especially, I think you have to be willing to take this value at pick 82. He needs to be the pick there. I already got the Gibbs and Kelsey stuff. That could actually be the pick that saves my whole build. The fact that Addison falls through there if he doesn't wind up, meaningfully suspended. This is one where I went 2-2-1 to start. Jeez, some of these are weird. All right, I went McCaffrey at 101, and then I went Shannon Diggs at the 2-3, and McBride comes all the way to the 4-5. So I go McBride, Keenan. This is a great example of how different it is from the 1 hole, though. I know that at the 6-7 turn, I can still get 2 receivers here and still get to 4, even though I went running back, tight end in 3 of the first 4 rounds. I can't even take a second detour at the back end, but I'm taking 3 detours there, and I'm like, okay, look at this. Hey, Deontay Johnson made it back to me. Hey, JSN made it back to me. So now, this team still is only going to have 4 through 7, but look at what it gets out of that. It gets both McCaffrey and Devon Achane, and it gets Trey McBride. That's all that I got. That's as punishment, and I still get Diggs, Keenan Allen, Deontay Johnson, and JSN. It's just not fair to pick from the 1 hole this year, how much better your build can be, how much less pressure there is. Yeah, you can really consider that second detour. I went 3 detours there. It's a weaker wide receiver room than I really, really want, but it's not the end of the world kind of a wide receiver room. In fact, obviously, I've been pushing Deontay Johnson up, and so to get him at that turn, I haven't taken him at the 5-6 turn. I just got him at the 6-7 turn. I mean, that's a build that I certainly enjoy. Justin Jefferson, Drake London, Stefon Diggs, Trey McBride, Xavier Worthy. This is one of the more traditional builds you'll see me do. 4 receivers and a tight end through 5. And then Roma Dunze sitting there in the middle of the 6th. Is there any reason I wouldn't take him? DeAndre Hopkins, maybe. Deontay Johnson, maybe. I think when I get to where he's my wide receiver 5, I like to take a Dunze. I don't have to rely on him so much, but I get some of that upside built in. You could have talked me into Kittle as well as that second elite tight end. We'll see if Stroud swings back around. He would be an option in the 7th to pair with Diggs. The Kittle bet would have been that one of these receivers comes back in the 7th to 79. That's where it's questionable. Sometimes you can get lucky. We saw JSN just a minute ago. But instead, I think you just want to be safe and take the receiver there, and then whatever. You're looking at Bowers as your tight end 2 or somebody later even. All right, one more pick. I got to go. Been saying that for an hour. Garrett Wilson, Devon Achane, Diggs, Kelsey. So this is a late round slot where I took 2 detours. Then I take Rashee Rice and then Patrick Mahomes. So he had fallen to 58. And I'd already taken the 2 detours, but I had Kelsey, and he was a clear ADP value. And the guys behind me, one had a QB, the other had no reason to take Mahomes. I was like, all right, well, I'll see if he comes around the corner. I'll take Rashee Rice to make it into a double stack. He did come around the corner, so I took him. His ADP is 49. I took him at pick 63. I get him, a full 14 picks after ADP. It's only a 3 receiver build, but it's now a Mahomes double stack. I don't have a lot of Mahomes in my portfolio. Yeah, that more or less tells you the whole story. I don't think I can even take a receiver. I guess this is probably the draft where you take Jameson Williams at pick 82 because you got to get a 4th receiver into this build. But I just don't see his profile being that much different than some of the guys. I mean, I think I really got to attack this group, that I've talked about before as being that's the next pocket where it makes sense. I mean, maybe like Sutton, again, target volume stuff, but you back yourself into a corner when you only have 3 receivers at this point. I could take Bowers and just get done with tight end so I don't have to worry about it. I could also leave tight end to the very end because I've bet so heavily on KC and the Kelsey bet. The other thing I could do is take a running back here, which frees up those 0 RB picks to be wide receiver, like round 11, round 12, round 13 could all be receiver picks. Aaron Jones has the same bye. But he's still, I think, pretty clearly the pick. I don't like the other guys on the same tier as Aaron Jones. So I take Aaron Jones there over a wide receiver pick. This team is now a really interesting one. It's the Mahomes double stack. It's got Achane and Aaron Jones. It's going to be late running backs beyond that. And week 6 is just going to be a low scoring one at running back. I'm probably going to go late tight end as well. And then I'll start to hit receiver, in the middle rounds where I'm usually not in that receiver pocket, but I will be in this draft. I do think that's a flaw. Like, I think people do that and then they tell themselves, well, I still wound up with enough receivers. And those receiver builds are why those teams are going to fail. And I think it's easier in July to tell yourself that team has more of a chance than you'll recognize in October. That's the best way I can put it. But that's why I took Rashee Rice ahead of ADP here, because if this team's going to win, it's going to win because I had 3 studs, which is Garrett Wilson, Stefon Diggs, and Rashee Rice. That gives it a chance at least. Rice is going to have to be not suspended. All right. I'm not on the clock in any drafts. I did it. Most of you guys have already left, and more power to you. Appreciate those of you who stuck around. This has been a blast. I got to go. I got to take my daughter. I've been mentioning this repeatedly. Angus shows back up. He says, hell yeah, we're still going. That was 2 minutes ago. Ask me any questions you have in the comments. I reply to every question and comment that I get. I'm not going to go back through the last little bit of the chat. Had to get those drafts out. Like, subscribe. Appreciate everyone subscribing. I'm still trying to get to the next subscriber goals. I'm hoping to get to 2K, 3K. We're building towards 1.5 right now. I got to do a better job of announcing these streams, I think. But this was a fun one. I appreciate you guys as well. A lot of people leaving and coming back. I do think we're giving out high-level stuff here. So I appreciate those of you who come and stick it out and hang out. I'm trying to continue to grow the stream, trying to do big numbers on these videos. It's going to get busy the next couple months. I'm going to frankly do the number of videos that I think the interest is warranting, right? So when there's more people showing up and doing all this stuff, I have a lot more desire and interest in continuing to hit the streams. Appreciate all you guys for coming. Yeah, this has been Stealing Signals, so I'll do it. Later.